The Eldest Lady's Tale. Verily a strange tale is mine, and 'tis this: yon 2 black bitches are my eldest sisters by one mother and father, and these 2 others, she who beareth upon her the signs of stripes, and the third our procuratrix, are my sisters by another mother. When my father died, each took her share of the heritage, and, after a while, my mother also deceased, leaving me and my sisters German 3,000 dinars, so each daughter received her portion of 1,000 dinars, and I the same, Alb the youngest. In due course of time my sisters married with the usual festivities and lived with their husbands, who bought merchandise with their wives' monies and set out on their travels together. Thus they threw me off. My brothers-in-law were absent with their wives 5 years, during which period they spent all the money they had and, becoming bankrupt, deserted my sisters in foreign parts amid stranger folk. After 5 years my eldest sister returned to me in beggar's gear with her clothes in rags and tatters and a dirty old mantilla, and truly she was in the foulest and sorriest plight. At first sight I did not know my own sister, but presently I recognized her and said, "What state is this?" "O our sister," she replied, "words cannot undo the done, and the reed of destiny hath run through what Allah decreed." Then I sent her to the bath and dressed her in a suit of mine own, and boiled for her a bouillon and brought her some good wine and said to her, "O my sister, thou art the eldest, who still standest to us in the stead of father and mother, and, as for the inheritance which came to me as to you twain, Allah hath blessed it and prospered it to me with increase, and my circumstances are easy, for I have made much money by spinning and cleaning silk, and I and you will share my wealth alike." I entreated her with all kindliness, and she abode with me a whole year, during which our thoughts and fancies were always full of our other sister. Shortly after she too came home in yet fouler and sorrier plight than that of my eldest sister, and I dealt by her still more honorably than I had done by the first, and each of them had a share of my substance. After a time they said to me, "O our sister, we desire to marry again, for indeed we have not patience to drag on our days without husbands and to lead the lives of widows bewitched." And I replied, "O eyes of me, ye have hitherto seen scanty weal in wedlock, for nowadays good men and true are become rarities and curiosities, nor do I deem your projects advisable, as ye have already made trial of matrimony and have failed." But they would not accept my advice and married without my consent. Nevertheless I gave them outfit and dowries out of my money, and they fared forth with their mates. In a mighty little time their husbands played them false and, taking whatever they could lay hands upon, levanted and left them in the lurch. Thereupon they came to me ashamed and in abject case and made their excuses to me, saying, "Pardon our fault and be not wroth with us, for although thou art younger in years yet art thou older in wit, henceforth we will never make mention of marriage, so take us back as thy handmaidens that we may eat our mouthful." Quoth I, "Welcome to you, O my sisters, there is naught dearer to me than you." And I took them in and redoubled my kindness to them. We ceased not to live after this loving fashion for a full year, when I resolved to sell my wares abroad and first to fit me a conveyance for Bassorah. So I equipped a large ship, and loaded her with merchandise and valuable goods for traffic, and with provaunt and all needful for a voyage, and said to my sisters, "Will ye abide at home whilst I travel, or would ye prefer to accompany me on the voyage?" "We will travel with thee," answered they, "for we cannot bear to be parted from thee." So I divided my monies into 2 parts, one to accompany me and the other to be left in charge of a trusty person, for, as I said to myself, haply some accident may happen to the ship and yet we remain alive, in which case we shall find on our return what may stand us in good stead. I took my 2 sisters and we went a-voyaging some days and nights, but the master was careless enough to miss his course, and the ship went astray with us and entered a sea other than the sea we sought. For a time we knew naught of this, and the wind blew fair for us 10 days, after which the lookout man went aloft to see about him and cried, "Good news." Then he came down rejoicing and said, "I have seen what seemeth to be a city as 'twere a pigeon." Hereat we rejoiced, and, ere an hour of the day had passed, the buildings showed plain in the offing, and we asked the captain, "What is the name of yonder city?" And he answered, "By Allah I wot not, for I never saw it before and never sailed these seas in my life. But, since our troubles have ended in safety, Remains for you only to land there with your merchandise and, if you find selling profitable, sell and make your market of what is there, and if not, we will rest here 2 days and provision ourselves and fare away. So we entered the port, and the captain went up town and was absent a while, after which he returned to us and said, Arise, go up into the city and marvel at the works of Allah with his creatures and pray to be preserved from his righteous wrath. So we landed, and going up into the city, saw at the gate men hending staves in hand, but when we drew near them, behold, they had been translated by the anger of Allah and had become stones. Then we entered the city and found all who therein woned into black stones instoned. Not an inhabited house appeared to the espire, nor was there a blower of fire. We were awe-struck at the sight and threaded the market streets where we found the goods and gold and silver left lying in their places, and we were glad and said, Doubtless there is some mystery in all this. Then we dispersed about the thoroughfares and each busied himself with collecting the wealth and money and rich stuffs, taking scanty heed of friend or comrade. As for myself, I went up to the castle, which was strongly fortified, and, entering the king's palace by its gate of red gold, found all the vaiselle of gold and silver, and the king himself seated in the midst of his chamberlains and nabobs and emirs and wazirs, all clad in raiment which confounded man's art. I drew nearer and saw him sitting on a throne encrusted and inlaid with pearls and gems, and his robes were of gold cloth adorned with jewels of every kind, each one flashing like a star. Around him stood 50 Mamelukes, white slaves, clothed in silks of divers sorts, holding their drawn swords in their hands, but when I drew near to them, lo, all were black stones. My understanding was confounded at the sight, but I walked on and entered the great hall of the harem, whose walls I found hung with tapestries of gold-striped silk and spread with silken carpets embroidered with golden cowers. Here I saw the queen lying at full length arrayed in robes purfled with fresh young pearls. On her head was a diadem set with many sorts of gems, each fit for a ring, and around her neck hung collars and necklaces. All her raiment and her ornaments were in natural state, but she had been turned into a black stone by Allah's wrath. Presently I espied an open door, for which I made straight, and found leading to it a flight of 7 steps. So I walked up and came upon a place pargeted with marble and spread and hung with gold-worked carpets and tapestry, a middlemost of which stood a throne of juniper wood inlaid with pearls and precious stones and set with bosses of emeralds. In the further wall was an alcove whose curtains, bestrung with pearls, were let down, and I saw a light issuing therefrom. So I drew near and perceived that the light came from a precious stone as big as an ostrich egg, set at the upper end of the alcove upon a little chryselephantine couch of ivory and gold, and this jewel, blazing like the sun, cast its rays wide and side. The couch also was spread with all manner of silken stuffs, amazing the gazer with their richness and beauty. I marveled much at all this, especially when seeing in that place candles ready lighted, and I said in my mind, Needs must someone have lighted these candles. Then I went forth and came to the kitchen, and thence to the buttery and the king's treasure chambers, and continued to explore the palace and to pace from place to place. I forgot myself in my awe and marvel at these matters, and I was drowned in thought till the night came on. Then I would have gone forth, but knowing not the gate I lost my way, so I returned to the alcove whither the lighted candles directed me, and sat down upon the couch, and wrapping myself in a coverlet, after I had repeated somewhat from the Quran, I would have slept but could not, for restlessness possessed me. When night was at its noon I heard a voice chanting the Quran in sweetest accents, but the tone thereof was weak, so I rose, glad to hear the silence broken, and followed the sound until I reached a closet whose door stood ajar. Then peeping through a chink I considered the place, and lo! It was an oratory wherein was a prayer niche with 2 wax candles burning and lamps hanging from the ceiling. In it too was spread a prayer carpet whereupon sat a youth fair to see, and before him on its stand was a copy of the Quran, from which he was reading. I marveled to see him alone alive amongst the people of the city, and entering saluted him, whereupon he raised his eyes and returned my salam. Quoth I, Now by the truth of what thou readest in Allah's holy book, I conjure thee to answer my question. He looked upon me with a smile and said, O handmaid of Allah, first tell me the cause of thy coming hither, and I in turn will tell what hath befallen both me and the people of this city, and what was the reason of my escaping their doom. So I told him my story, whereat he wondered, and I questioned him of the people of the city, when he replied, Have patience with me for a while, O my sister, and, reverently closing the holy book, he laid it up in a satin bag. Then he seated me by his side, and I looked at him, and behold, he was as the moon at its full, fair of face and rare of form, soft-sided and slight, of well-proportioned height, and cheek smoothly bright and diffusing light, in brief a sweet, a sugar stick. Even as saith the poet of the like of him in these couplets. That night th astrologer a scheme of planets drew, and lo, a graceful shape of youth appeared in view. Saturn had stained his locks with saturninous jet, and spots of nut-brown musk on rosy side face blue. Mars tinctured either cheek with tinct of martial red. Sagittal shots from eyelids Sagittarius threw, dowered him Mercury with bright mercurial wit. Bore off the bear what all man's evil glances grew, amazed stood Astrophil to sight the marvel birth. When louted low the moon at full to bust the earth. And of a truth Allah the Most High had robed him in the raiment of perfect grace, and had purfled and fringed it with a cheek all beauty and loveliness, even as the poet saith of such an one. By his eyelids shedding perfume and his fine slim waist I swear, by the shooting of his shafts barbed with sorcery passing rare, by the softness of his sides, and glances lingering light, and brow of dazzling daytide ray and night within his hair, by his eyebrows which deny to who look upon them rest. Now bidding, now forbidding, ever dealing joy and care, by the rose that decks his cheek, and the myrtle of its moss. By jacinths bedded in his lips and pearl his smile lays bare, by his graceful bending neck and the curving of his breast, whose polished surface beareth those granados, lovely pair, by his heavy hips that quiver as he passeth in his pride. Or he resteth with that waist which is slim beyond compare, by the satin of his skin, by that fine unsullied sprite. By the beauty that containeth all things bright and debonair, by that ever open hand, by the candour of his tongue, by noble blood and high degree whereof his hope and air, musk from him borrows muskiness she loveth to exhale. And all the airs of ambergris through him perfume the air, the sun, methinks, the broad bright sun, before my love would pale. And sans his splendour would appear a paring of his nail. I glanced at him with one glance of eyes which caused me 1,000 sighs, and my heart was at once taken captive wise, so I asked him, O my lord and my love, tell me that whereof I questioned thee, and he answered, Hearing is obeying. Know, O handmaid of Allah, that this city was the capital of my father who is the king thou sawest on the throne transfigured by Allah's wrath to a black stone, and the queen thou foundest in the alcove is my mother. They and all the people of the city were Magians who fire adored in lieu of the omnipotent Lord and were wont to swear by low and heat and shade and light and the spheres revolving day and night. My father had ne'er a son till he was blessed with me near the last of his days, and he reared me till I grew up and prosperity anticipated me in all things. Now it so fortuned that there was with us an old woman well stricken in years, a Moslemah who, inwardly believing in Allah and his apostle, conformed outwardly with the religion of my people, and my father placed thorough confidence in her for that he knew her to be trustworthy and virtuous, and he treated her with ever-increasing kindness, believing her to be of his own belief. So when I was well nigh grown up, my father committed me to her charge, saying, Take him and educate him and teach him the rules of our faith, let him have the best instructions and cease not thy fostering care of him. So she took me and taught me the tenets of al-Islam with the divine ordinances of the wuzu ablution and the 5 daily prayers, and she made me learn the Quran by rote, often repeating, Serve none save Allah Almighty. When I had mastered this much of knowledge, she said to me, O my son, keep this matter concealed from thy sire and reveal naught to him lest he slay thee. So I hid it from him, and I abode on this wise for a term of days, when the old woman died, and the people of the city redoubled in their impiety and arrogance and the error of their ways. One day, while they were as wont, behold, they heard a loud and terrible sound, and a crier crying out with a voice like roaring thunder, so every ear could hear, far and near, O folk of this city, leave ye your fire worshipping and adore Allah the all-compassionate King. At this, fear and terror fell upon the citizens, and they crowded to my father, he being king of the city, and asked him, "What is this awesome voice we have heard? For it hath confounded us with the excess of its terror." And he answered, "Let not a voice fright you, nor shake your steadfast sprite, nor turn you back from the faith which is right." Their hearts inclined to his words, and they ceased not to worship the fire, and they persisted in rebellion for a full year from the time they heard the first voice. And on the anniversary came a second cry, and a third at the head of the third year. Each year once still they persisted in their malpractices, till one day at break of dawn, judgment and the wrath of heaven descended upon them with all suddenness, and by the visitation of Allah all were metamorphosed into black stones, they and their beasts and their cattle, and none was saved save myself, who at the time was engaged in my devotions. From that day to this I am in the case thou serest, constant in prayer and fasting and reading and reciting the Quran, but I am indeed grown weary by reason of my loneliness, having none to bear me company. Then said I to him, for in very sooth he had won my heart and was the Lord of my life and soul, O youth, wilt thou fare with me to Baghdad city and visit the ulama and men learned in the law and doctors of divinity, and get the increase of wisdom and understanding and theology? And know that she who standeth in thy presence will be thy handmaid, albeit she be head of her family and mistress over men and eunuchs and servants and slaves. Indeed my life was no life before it fell in with thy youth. I have here a ship laden with merchandise, and in very truth destiny drove me to this city that I might come to the knowledge of these matters, for it was fated that we should meet. And I ceased not to persuade him and speak him fair and use every art till he consented. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of day and ceased to say her permitted say. When it was the 18th night, she continued, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the lady ceased not persuading with soft speech the youth to depart with her till he consented and said yes. She slept that night lying at his feet and hardly knowing where she was for excess of joy. As soon as the next morning dawned, she pursued, addressing the Caliph, I arose and we entered the treasuries and took thence whatever was light in weight and great in worth. Then we went down side by side from the castle to the city, where we were met by the captain and my sisters and slaves who had been seeking for me. When they saw me they rejoiced and asked what had stayed me, and I told them all I had seen and related to them the story of the young prince and the transformation wherewith the citizens had been justly visited. Hereat all marveled, but when my two sisters, these two bitches, O commander of the faithful, saw me by the side of my young lover, they jaloused me on his account and were wroth and plotted mischief against me. We awaited a fair wind and went on board rejoicing and ready to fly for joy by reason of the goods we had gotten, but my own greatest joyance was in the youth, and we waited a while till the wind blew fair for us, and then we set sail and fared forth. Now as we sat talking, my sisters asked me, And what wilt thou do with this handsome young man? And I answered, I purpose to make him my husband. Then I turned to him and said, O my lord, I have that to propose to thee wherein thou must not cross me. And this it is that, when we reach Baghdad, my native city, I offer thee my life as thy handmaiden in holy matrimony, and thou shalt be to me baron and I will be femme to thee. He answered, I hear and I obey, thou art my lady and my mistress, and whatso thou doest I will not gainsay. Then I turned to my sisters and said, This is my gain, I content me with this youth, and those who have gotten aught of my property let them keep it as their gain with my good will. Thou sayest and doest well, answered the twain, but they imagined mischief against me. We ceased not spooning before a fair wind till we had exchanged the sea of peril for the seas of safety, and, in a few days, we made Bassorah city, whose buildings loomed clear before us as evening fell. But after we had retired to rest and were sound asleep, my two sisters arose and took me up, bed and all, and threw me into the sea. They did the same with the young prince who, as he could not swim, sank and was drowned, and Allah enrolled him in the noble army of martyrs. As for me, would heaven I had been drowned with him, but Allah deemed that I should be of the saved. So when I awoke and found myself in the sea and saw the ship making off like a dash of lightning, he threw in my way a piece of timber which I bestrided, and the waves tossed me to and fro till they cast me upon an island coast, a high land and an uninhabited. I landed and walked about the island the rest of the night, and, when morning dawned, I saw a rough track barely fit for child of Adam to tread, leading to what proved a shallow ford connecting island and mainland. As soon as the sun had risen I spread my garments to dry in its rays, and ate of the fruits of the island and drank of its waters. Then I set out along the foot track and ceased not walking till I reached the mainland. Now when there remained between me and the city but a 2 hours' journey, behold, a great serpent, the bigness of a date palm, came fleeing towards me in all haste, gliding along now to the right then to the left till she was close upon me, whilst her tongue lolled groundwards a span long and swept the dust as she went. She was pursued by a dragon who was not longer than 2 lances, and of slender build about the bulk of a spear, and, although her terror lent her speed, and she kept wriggling from side to side, he overtook her and seized her by the tail, whereat her tears streamed down and her tongue was thrust out in her agony. I took pity on her and, picking up a stone and calling upon Allah for aid, threw it at the dragon's head with such force that he died then and there, and the serpent opening a pair of wings flew into the lift and disappeared from before my eyes. I sat down marveling over that adventure, but I was weary and, drowsiness overcoming me, I slept where I was for a while. When I awoke I found a jet-black damsel sitting at my feet shampooing them, and by her side stood 2 black bitches, my sisters, O Commander of the Faithful. I was ashamed before her and, sitting up, asked her, O my sister, who and what art thou? And she answered, How soon hast thou forgotten me? I am she for whom thou wroughtest a good deed and sowedest the seed of gratitude and slewest her foe, for I am the serpent whom by Allah's aidance thou didst just now deliver from the dragon. I am a Jinniyah and he was a jinn who hated me, and none saved my life from him save thou. As soon as thou freedest me from him I flew on the wind to the ship whence thy sisters threw thee, and removed all that was therein to thy house. Then I ordered my attendant Marids to sink the ship, and I transformed thy 2 sisters into these black bitches, for I know all that hath passed between them and thee, but as for the youth, of a truth he is drowned. So saying, she flew up with me and the bitches, and presently set us down on the terrace roof of my house, wherein I found ready stored the whole of what property was in my ship, nor was aught of it missing. Now, continued the serpent that was, I swear by all engraven on the seal ring of Solomon, with whom be peace, unless thou deal to each of these bitches 300 stripes every day I will come and imprison thee forever under the earth. I answered, hearkening and obedience, and away she flew. But before going she again charged me, saying, I again swear by him who made the 2 seas flow, and this be my second oath, if thou gainsay me I will come and transform thee like thy sisters. Since then I have never failed, O Commander of the Faithful, to beat them with that number of blows till their blood flows with my tears, I pitying them the while, and well they wot that their being scourged is no fault of mine and they accept my excuses. And this is my tale and my history. The Caliph marvelled at her adventures and then signed to Geographer, who said to the second lady, the portress, And thou, how camest thou by the welts and wheals upon thy body? So she began the tale of the portress. Know, O Commander of the Faithful, that I had a father who, after fulfilling his time, deceased and left me great store of wealth. I remained single for a short time and presently married one of the richest of his day. I abode with him a year when he also died, and my share of his property amounted to 80,000 dinars in gold according to the holy law of inheritance. Thus I became passing rich and my reputation spread far and wide, for I had made me 10 changes of raiment, each worth 1,000 dinars. One day as I was sitting at home, behold, there came in to me an old woman with lantern jaws and cheeks sucked in, and eyes rucked up, and eyebrows scant and scald, and head bare and bald, and teeth broken by time and mauled, and back bending and neck nape nodding, and face blotched, and rheum running, and hair like a snake black and white speckled, in complexion a very fright, even as saith the poet of the like of her. Ill-omened hag, unshriven be her sins, nor mercy visit her on dying bed, 1,000 head strongest he mules would her guiles, despite their bolting lead with spider thread. And as saith another, a hag to whom th unlawful lawfulest, and witchcraft wisdom in her sight are grown, a mischief-making brat, a demon maid, a whorish woman and a pimping crone. When the old woman entered she salamed to me and kissing the ground before me, said, I have at home an orphan daughter and this night are her wedding and her displaying. We be poor folks and strangers in this city knowing none inhabitant and we are broken-hearted. So do thou earn for thyself a recompense and a reward in heaven by being present at her displaying, and, when the ladies of this city shall hear that thou art to make act of presence, they also will present themselves. So shalt thou comfort her affliction, for she is sore bruised in spirit, and she hath none to look to save Allah the Most High. Then she wept and kissed my feet, reciting these couplets. Thy presence bringeth us a grace. We own before thy winsome face, and wert thou absent ne'er an one could stand instead or take thy place. So pity get hold on me and compassion, and I said, hearing is consenting, and, please Allah, I will do somewhat more for her, nor shall she be shown to her bridegroom save in my raiment and ornaments and jewelry. At this the old woman rejoiced and bowed her head to my feet and kissed them, saying, Allah requite thee weal, and comfort thy heart even as thou hast comforted mine. But, O my lady, do not trouble thyself to do me this service at this hour. Be thou ready by supper time, when I will come and fetch thee. So saying she kissed my hand and went her ways. I set about stringing my pearls and donning my brocades and making my toilette. Little recking what fortune had in womb for me, when suddenly the old woman stood before me, simpering and smiling till she showed every tooth stump, and quoth she, O my mistress, the city madams have arrived, and when I apprised them that thou promisedst to be present, they were glad, and they are now awaiting thee and looking eagerly for thy coming and for the honor of meeting thee. So I threw on my mantilla and, making the old crone walk before me and my handmaidens behind me, I fared till we came to a street well watered and swept neat, where the winnowing breeze blew cool and sweet. Here we were stopped by a gate arched over with a dome of marble stone firmly seated on solidest foundation, and leading to a palace whose walls from earth rose tall and proud, and whose pinnacle was crowned by the clouds, and over the doorway were writ these couplets. I am the wone where mirth shall ever smile, the home of joyance through my lasting while, and mid my court a fountain jets and flows. Nor tears nor troubles shall that fount defile, the marge with royal Enuman's bloom is dight. Myrtle, narcissus flower, and chamomile. Arrived at the gate, before which hung a black curtain, the old woman knocked and it was opened to us, when we entered and found a vestibule spread with carpets and hung around with lamps all alight and wax candles in candelabra adorned with pendants of precious gems and noble ores. We passed on through this passage till we entered a saloon, whose like for grandeur and beauty is not to be found in this world. It was hung and carpeted with silken stuffs, and was illuminated with branches, sconces and tapers ranged in double row, an avenue abutting on the upper or noble end of the saloon, where stood a couch of juniper wood encrusted with pearls and gems and surmounted by a baldaquin with mosquito curtains of satin looped up with margaritas. And hardly had we taken note of this when there came forth from the baldaquin a young lady, and I looked, O Commander of the Faithful, upon a face and form more perfect than the moon when fullest, with a favour brighter than the dawn gleaming with saffron-hued light, even as the poet sang when he said, Thou pacest the palace a marvel sight. A bride for a Kisra's or Kaiser's night, wantons the rose on thy roseate cheek. O cheek as the blood of the dragon bright, slim-waisted, languorous, sleepy-eyed, with charms which promise all love delight, and the tire which attires thy tiara'd brow, is a night of woe on a morn's glad light. The fair young girl came down from the estrade and said to me, Welcome and good cheer to my sister, the dearly beloved, the illustrious, and 1,000 greeting. Then she recited these couplets. And but the house could know who cometh twould rejoice, and kiss the very dust whereon thy foot was placed, and with the tongue of circumstance the walls would say, Welcome and hail to one with generous gifts in grace. Then sat she down and said to me, O my sister, I have a brother who hath had sight of thee at sundry wedding feasts and festive seasons. He is a youth handsomer than I, and he hath fallen desperately in love with thee, for that bounteous destiny hath garnered in thee all beauty and perfection. And he hath given silver to this old woman that she might visit thee, and she hath contrived on this wise to foregather us twain. He hath heard that thou art one of the nobles of thy tribe, nor is he aught less in his, and, being desirous to ally his lot with thy lot, he hath practised this device to bring me in company with thee, for he is fain to marry thee after the ordinance of Allah and his apostle, and in what is lawful and right there is no shame. When I heard these words and saw myself fairly entrapped in the house, I said, hearing is consenting. She was delighted at this and clapped her hands, whereupon a door opened and out of it came a young man blooming in the prime of life, exquisitely dressed, a model of beauty and loveliness and symmetry and perfect grace, with gentle winning manners and eyebrows like a bended bow and shaft on cord, and eyes which bewitched all hearts with sorcery lawful in the sight of the Lord, even as saith some rhymer describing the like of him. His face as the face of the young moon shines, and fortune stamps him with pearls for signs. And Allah favor him who said, blessed be his beauty, blessed the Lord's decree. Who cast and shaped a thing so bright of blee, all gifts of beauty he conjoins in one. Lost in his love is all humanity, for beauty's self inscribed on his brow. I testify there be no good but he. When I looked at him my heart inclined to him and I loved him, and he sat by my side and talked with me a while, when the young lady again clapped her hands and behold, a side door opened and out of it came the Qazi with his 4 assessors as witnesses, and they saluted us and, sitting down, drew up and wrote out the marriage contract between me and the youth and retired. Then he turned to me and said, be our night blessed, presently adding, O my lady, I have a condition to lay on thee. Quoth I, O my lord, what is that? Whereupon he arose and fetching a copy of the holy book presented it to me, saying, swear hereon thou wilt never look at any other than myself nor incline thy body or thy heart to him. I swore readily enough to this, and he joyed with exceeding joy and embraced me round the neck, while love for him possessed my whole heart. Then they set the table before us and we ate and drank till we were satisfied, but I was dying for the coming of the night. And when night did come he led me to the bride chamber and slept with me on the bed and continued to kiss and embrace me till the morning. Such a night I had never seen in my dreams. I lived with him a life of happiness and delight for a full month, at the end of which I asked his leave to go on foot to the bazaar and buy me certain especial stuffs, and he gave me permission. So I donned my mantilla and, taking with me the old woman and a slave girl, I went to the khan of the silk mercers, where I seated myself in the shop front of a young merchant whom the old woman recommended, saying to me, this youth's father died when he was a boy and left him great store of wealth. He hath by him a mighty fine stock of goods, and thou wilt find what thou seekest with him, for none in the bazaar hath better stuffs than he. Then she said to him, show this lady the most costly stuffs thou hast by thee. And he replied, hearkening and obedience. Then she whispered me, say a civil word to him, but I replied, I am pledged to address no man save my lord. And as she began to sound his praise I said sharply to her, we want naught of thy sweet speeches, our wish is to buy of him whatsoever we need, and return home. So he brought me all I sought and I offered him his money, but he refused to take it, saying, let it be a gift offered to my guest this day. Then quoth I to the old woman, if he will not take the money, give him back his stuff. By Allah, cried he, not a thing will I take from thee, I sell it not for gold or for silver, but I give it all as a gift for a single kiss, a kiss more precious to me than everything the shop containeth. Asked the old woman, what will the kiss profit thee? And, turning to me, whispered, O my daughter, thou hearest what this young fellow saith. What harm will it do thee if he get a kiss from thee and thou gettest what thou seekest at that price? Replied I take refuge with Allah from such action. Knowest thou not that I am bound by an oath? But she answered, now wist. Just let him kiss thee and neither speak to him nor lean over him, so shalt thou keep thine oath and thy silver, and no harm whatever shall befall thee. And she ceased not to persuade me and importune me and make light of the matter till evil entered into my mind, and I put my head in the poke and, declaring I would ne'er consent, consented. So I veiled my eyes and held up the edge of my mantilla between me and the people passing, and he put his mouth to my cheek under the veil. But while kissing me he bit me so hard a bite that it tore the flesh from my cheek, and blood flowed fast and faintness came over me. The old woman caught me in her arms and, when I came to myself, I found the shop shut up and her sorrowing over me and saying, thank Allah for averting which might have been worse. Then she said to me, come, take heart and let us go home before the matter become public and thou be dishonored. And when thou art safe inside the house feign sickness and lie down and cover thyself up, and I will bring thee powders and plasters to cure this bite withal, and thy wound will be healed at the latest in 3 days. So after a while I arose, and I was in extreme distress, and terror came full upon me. But I went on little by little till I reached the house, when I pleaded illness and lay me down. When it was night, my husband came in to me and said, "What hath befallen thee, O my darling, in this excursion of thine?" And I replied, "I am not well, my head acheth badly." Then he lighted a candle and drew near me and looked hard at me and asked, "What is that wound I see on thy cheek and in the tenderest part too?" And I answered, "When I went out today with thy leave to buy stuffs, a camel laden with firewood jostled me, and one of the pieces tore my veil and wounded my cheek, as thou sayest, for indeed the ways of this city are strait. Tomorrow," cried he, "I will go complain to the governor, so shall he gibbet every fuel seller in Baghdad." "Allah upon thee," said I, "burden not thy soul with such sin against any man. The fact is, I was riding on an ass, and it stumbled, throwing me to the ground, and my cheek lighted upon a stick or a bit of glass and got this wound." "Then," said he, "tomorrow I will go up to Geographer the Barmaki and tell him the story, so shall he kill every donkey boy in Baghdad." "Wouldst thou destroy all these men because of my wound?" said I, "when this which befell me was by decree of Allah and his destiny?" But he answered, "There is no help for it," and, springing to his feet, plied me with words and pressed me till I was perplexed and frightened, and I stuttered and stammered, and my speech waxed thick, and I said, "This is a mere accident by decree of Allah." Then, O Commander of the Faithful, he guessed my case and said, "Thou hast been false to thine oath." He at once cried out with a loud cry, whereupon a door opened, and in came 7 black slaves, whom he commanded to drag me from my bed and throw me down in the middle of the room. Furthermore, he ordered one of them to pinion my elbows and squat upon my head, and a second to sit upon my knees and secure my feet, and drawing his sword he gave it to a third and said, "Strike her, O Sa'ad, and cut her in twain, and let each one take half and cast it into the Tigris, that the fish may eat her. For such is the retribution due to those who violate their vows and are unfaithful to their love." And he redoubled in wrath and recited these couplets. "And there be one who shares with me her love. I'd strangle love though life by love were slain, saying, O soul, death were the nobler choice. For ill is love when shared twixt partners twain." Then he repeated to the slave, "Smite her, O Sa'ad." And when the slave who was sitting upon me made sure of the command, he bent down to me and said, "O my mistress, repeat the profession of faith, and bethink thee if there be anything thou wouldst have done, for verily this is the last hour of thy life." "O good slave," said I, "wait but a little while and get off my head, that I may charge thee with my last injunctions." Then I raised my head and saw the state I was in, how I had fallen from high degree into lowest disgrace, and into death after life, and such life, and how I had brought my punishment on myself by my own sin, whereupon the tears streamed from mine eyes, and I wept with exceeding weeping. But he looked on me with eyes of wrath, and began repeating, "Tell her who turneth from our love to work it injury sore, and taketh her a fine new love, the old love tossing o'er. We cry enough, O the air, thou enough of us shalt cry. What passed between us doth suffice, and haply something more." When I heard this, O Commander of the Faithful, I wept and looked at him and began repeating these couplets. "To severance you doom my love, and all unmoved remain. My tear sore lids you sleepless make, and sleep while I complain. You make firm friendship reign between mine eyes and insomny. Yet can my heart forget you not, nor tears can I restrain. You made me swear with many an oath my troth to hold for aye. But when you reigned my bosom's lord, you wrought me traitor bane. I loved you like a silly child who wots not what is love. Then spare the learner, let her not be by the master slain. By Allah's name I pray you write, when I am dead and gone upon my tomb, this died of love whose senses love had ta'en. Then haply one shall pass that way who fire of love hath felt, and treading on a lover's heart with ruth and woe shall melt." When I ended my verses, tears came again, but the poetry and the weeping only added fury to his fury, and he recited, "'Twas not satiety bade me leave the dearling of my soul, but that she sinned a mortal sin which clipped me in its clip. She sought to let another share the love between us twain. But my true faith of unity refuseth partnership." When he ceased reciting, I wept again and prayed his pardon and humbled myself before him and spoke him softly, saying to myself, "I will work on him with words, so haply he will refrain from slaying me, even though he take all I have." So I complained of my sufferings and began to repeat these couplets. Now, by thy life and wert thou just my life thou hadst not tarien. But who can break the severance law which parteth lovers twain? Thou loadest me with heavy weight of longing love, when I can hardly bear my chemisette for weakness and for pain. I marvel not to see my life and soul in ruin lain. I marvel much to see my frame such severance pangs sustain. When I ended my verse I wept again, and he looked at me and reviled me in abusive language, repeating these couplets. Thou wast all taken up with love of other man, not me. 'Twas thine to show me severance face, 'twas only mine to see. I'll leave thee for that first thou wast of me to take thy leave. And patient bear that parting blow thou borest so patiently, e'en as thou soughtest other love, so other love I'll seek. And make the crime of murdering love thine own atrocity. When he had ended his verses he again cried out to the slave, Cut her in half and free us from her, for we have no profit of her. So the slave drew near me, O commander of the faithful, and I ceased bandying verses and made sure of death and, despairing of life, committed my affairs to Almighty Allah, when behold, the old woman rushed in and threw herself at my husband's feet and kissed them and wept and said, O my son, by the rights of my fosterage and by my long service to thee, I conjure thee pardon this young lady, for indeed she hath done nothing deserving such doom. Thou art a very young man, and I fear lest her death be laid at thy door, for it is said, Whoso slayeth shall be slain. As for this wanton, since thou deemest her such, drive her out from thy doors, from thy love and from thy heart. And she ceased not to weep and importune him till he relented and said, I pardon her, but needs must I set on her my mark which shall show upon her all her life. Then he bade the slaves drag me along the ground and lay me out at full length, after stripping me of all my clothes, and when the slaves had so sat upon me that I could not move, he fetched in a rod of quince tree and came down with it upon my body, and continued beating me on the back and sides till I lost consciousness from excess of pain, and I despaired of life. Then he commanded the slaves to take me away as soon as it was dark, together with the old woman to show them the way and throw me upon the floor of the house wherein I dwelt before my marriage. They did their lord's bidding and cast me down in my old home and went their ways. I did not revive from my swoon till dawn appeared, when I applied myself to the dressing of my wounds with ointments and other medicaments, and I medicined myself, but my sides and ribs still showed signs of the rod as thou hast seen. I lay in weakly case and confined to my bed for 4 months before I was able to rise and health returned to me. At the end of that time I went to the house where all this had happened and found it a ruin. The street had been pulled down endlong and rubbish heaps rose where the building erst was, nor could I learn how this had come about. Then I betook myself to this my sister on my father's side and found her with these 2 black bitches. I saluted her and told her what had betided me and the whole of my story, and she said, O my sister, who is safe from the despite of time and secure? Thanks be to Allah who has brought thee off safely. And she began to say, Such is the world, so bear a patient heart. When riches leave thee and when friends depart. Then she told me her own story, and what had happened to her with her 2 sisters and how matters had ended, so we abode together and the subject of marriage was never on our tongues for all these years. After a while we were joined by our other sister, the procuratrix, who goeth out every morning and buyeth all we require for the day and night, and we continued in such condition till this last night. In the morning our sister went out, as usual, to make her market, and then befell us what befell from bringing the porter into the house and admitting these 3 Calendar men. We entreated them kindly and honourably, and a quarter of the night had not passed ere 3 grave and respectable merchants from Mosul joined us and told us their adventures. We sat talking with them but on one condition which they violated, whereupon we treated them as sorted with their breach of promise, and made them repeat the account they had given of themselves. They did our bidding and we forgave their offence. So they departed from us, and this morning we were unexpectedly summoned to thy presence. And such is our story. The Caliph wondered at her words and bade the tale be recorded and chronicled and laid up in his muniment chambers. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of day and ceased saying her permitted say. When it was the 19th night, she continued, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the Caliph commanded this story and those of the sister and the calendars to be recorded in the archives and be set in the royal muniment chambers. Then he asked the eldest lady, the mistress of the house, "Knowest thou the whereabouts of the Ifrita who spelled thy sisters?" And she answered, "O Commander of the Faithful, she gave me a ringlet of her hair, saying, Whenas thou wouldest see me, burn a couple of these hairs and I will be with thee forthright, even though I were beyond Caucasus mountain." Quoth the Caliph, "Bring me hither the hair." So she brought it, and he threw the whole lock upon the fire. As soon as the odor of the burning hair dispread itself, the palace shook and trembled, and all present heard a rumbling and rolling of thunder and a noise as of wings, and lo, the Jinniyah who had been a serpent stood in the Caliph's presence. Now she was a Moslemah, so she saluted him and said, "Peace be with thee, O Vicar of Allah," whereto he replied, "And with thee also be peace and the mercy of Allah and his blessing." Then she continued, "Know that this damsel sowed for me the seed of kindness, wherefore I cannot enough requite her, in that she delivered me from death and destroyed mine enemy. Now I had seen how her sisters dealt with her and felt myself bound to avenge her on them. At first I was minded to slay them, but I feared it would be grievous to her, so I transformed them to bitches. But if thou desire their release, O Commander of the Faithful, I will release them to pleasure thee and her, for I am of the Moslems." Quoth the Caliph, "Release them, and after we will look into the affair of the beaten lady and consider her case carefully, and if the truth of her story be evidenced I will exact retaliation from him who wronged her." Said the Ifrita, "O Commander of the Faithful, I will forthwith release them and will discover to thee the man who did that deed by this lady and wronged her and took her property, and he is the nearest of all men to thee." So saying, she took a cup of water and muttered a spell over it and uttered words there was no understanding. Then she sprinkled some of the water over the faces of the two bitches, saying, "Return to your former human shape," whereupon they were restored to their natural forms and fell to praising their Creator. Then said the Ifrita, "O Commander of the Faithful, of a truth he who scourged this lady with rods is thy son Al-Amin, brother of Al-Mamun. For he had heard of her beauty and loveliness, and he played a lover's stratagem with her and married her according to the law and committed the crime, such as it is, of scourging her." Yet indeed he is not to be blamed for beating her, for he laid a condition on her and swore her by a solemn oath not to do a certain thing. However, she was false to her vow and he was minded to put her to death, but he feared Almighty Allah and contented himself with scourging her, as thou hast seen, and with sending her back to her own place. Such is the story of the second lady, and the Lord knoweth all. When the Caliph heard these words of the Ifrita, and knew who had beaten the damsel, he marveled with mighty marvel and said, "Praise be to Allah, the Most High, the Almighty, who hath shown his exceeding mercy towards me, enabling me to deliver these two damsels from sorcery and torture, and vouchsafing to let me know the secret of this lady's history. And now by Allah, we will do a deed which shall be recorded of us after we are no more." Then he summoned his son Al-Amin and questioned him of the story of the second lady, the portress, and he told it in the face of truth, whereupon the Caliph bade call into presence the Qazis and their witnesses and the three calendars and the first lady with her sisters German who had been ensorcelled, and he married the three to the three calendars whom he knew to be princes and sons of kings, and he appointed them chamberlains about his person, assigning to them stipends and allowances and all that they required, and lodging them in his palace at Baghdad. He returned the beaten lady to his son, Al-Amin, renewing the marriage contract between them, and gave her great wealth and bade rebuild the house fairer than it was before. As for himself, he took to wife the procuratrix and lay with her that night, and next day he set apart for her an apartment in his seraglio, with handmaidens for her service and a fixed daily allowance. And the people marveled at their Caliph's generosity and natural beneficence and princely wisdom, nor did he forget to send all these histories to be recorded in his annals. When Shahrazad ceased speaking, Dunyazad exclaimed, "O my own sister, by Allah, in very sooth this is a right pleasant tale and a delectable, never was heard the like of it, but prithee tell me now another story to while away what yet remaineth of the waking hours of this our night." She replied, "With love and gladness, if the king give me leave," and he said, "Tell thy tale and tell it quickly." So she began, in these words. The Tale of the Three Apples. They relate, O King of the age and Lord of the time and of these days, that the Caliph Harun al-Rashid summoned his Wazir Ja'far one night and said to him, I desire to go down into the city and question the common folk concerning the conduct of those charged with its governance, and those of whom they complain we will depose from office, and those whom they commend we will promote. Quoth Ja'far, hearkening and obedience. So the Caliph went down with Ja'far and eunuch Masra to the town and walked about the streets and markets, and, as they were threading a narrow alley, they came upon a very old man with a fishing net and crate to carry small fish on his head, and in his hand a staff, and, as he walked at a leisurely pace, he repeated these lines. They say me, thou shinest a light to mankind. With thy law as the night which the moon doth uplight, I answer, a truce to your jests and your jibes. Without luck what is learning, a poor devil white, if they take me to pawn with my law in my pouch, with my volumes to read and my ink case to write, for one day's provision they never could pledge me. As likely on doomsday to draw bill at sight, how poorly, indeed, doth it fare wi the poor. With his pauper existence and beggarly plight, in summer he faileth provision to find. In winter the firepot's his only delight, the street dogs with bite and with bark to him rise. And each losel receives him with bark and with bite, if he lift up his voice and complain of his wrong. None pities or heeds him, however his right, and when sorrows and evils like these he must brave, his happiest homestead were down in the grave. When the Caliph heard his verses he said to Ja'far, see this poor man and note his verses, for surely they point to his necessities. Then he accosted him and asked, O Sheikh, what be thine occupation? And the poor man answered, O my lord, I am a fisherman with a family to keep, and I have been out between midday and this time, and not a thing hath Allah made my portion wherewithal to feed my family. I cannot even pawn myself to buy them a supper, and I hate and disgust my life, and I hanker after death. Quoth the Caliph, say me, wilt thou return with us to Tigris bank and cast thy net on my luck, and whatsoever turneth up I will buy of thee for 100 gold pieces? The man rejoiced when he heard these words and said, on my head be it, I will go back with you, and, returning with them riverwards, made a cast and waited a while. Then he hauled in the rope and dragged the net ashore, and there appeared in it a chest padlocked and heavy. The Caliph examined it and lifted it, finding it weighty, so he gave the fisherman 200 dinars and sent him about his business, whilst Masra, aided by the Caliph, carried the chest to the palace and set it down and lighted the candles. Ja'far and Masra then broke it open and found therein a basket of palm leaves corded with red worsted. This they cut open and saw within it a piece of carpet which they lifted out, and under it was a woman's mantilla folded in four, which they pulled out, and at the bottom of the chest they came upon a young lady, fair as a silver ingot, slain and cut into 19 pieces. When the Caliph looked upon her he cried, alas, and tears ran down his cheeks, and turning to Ja'far he said, O dog of Wazirs, shall folk be murdered in our reign and be cast into the river to be a burden and a responsibility for us on the day of doom? By Allah, we must avenge this woman on her murderer, and he shall be made die the worst of death. And presently he added, now, as surely as we are descended from the sons of Abbas, if thou bring us not him who slew her, that we do her justice on him, I will hang thee at the gate of my palace, thee and 40 of thy kith and kin by thy side. And the Caliph was wroth with exceeding rage. Quoth Ja'far, grant me 3 days' delay, and quoth the Caliph, we grant thee this. So Ja'far went out from before him and returned to his own house, full of sorrow, and saying to himself, how shall I find him who murdered this damsel, that I may bring him before the Caliph? If I bring other than the murderer, it will be laid to my charge by the Lord. In very sooth I wot not what to do. He kept his house 3 days, and on the 4th day the Caliph sent one of the chamberlains for him and, as he came into the presence, asked him, where is the murderer of the damsel? To which answered Ja'far, O Commander of the Faithful, am I inspector of murdered folk that I should ken who killed her? The Caliph was furious at his answer and bade hang him before the palace gate, and commanded that a crier cry through the streets of Baghdad, whoso would see the hanging of Ja'far, the Barmaki, Wazir of the Caliph, with 40 of the Barmecides, his cousins and kinsmen, before the palace gate, let him come and let him look. The people flocked out from all the quarters of the city to witness the execution of Ja'far and his kinsmen, not knowing the cause. Then they set up the gallows and made Geographer and the others stand underneath in readiness for execution. But whilst every eye was looking for the Caliph's signal, and the crowd wept for Geographer and his cousins of the Barmecides, lo and behold, a young man fair of face and neat of dress and of favour like the moon raining light, with eyes black and bright, and brow flower white, and cheeks red as rose and young down where the beard grows, and a mole like a grain of ambergris, pushed his way through the people till he stood immediately before the Wazir and said to him, "Safety to thee from this strait, O Prince of the Emirs and Asylum of the Poor. I am the man who slew the woman ye found in the chest, so hang me for her and do her justice on me." When Ja'afar heard the youth's confession, he rejoiced at his own deliverance, but grieved and sorrowed for the fair youth. And whilst they were yet talking, behold, another man well stricken in years pressed forwards through the people and thrust his way amid the populace till he came to Ja'afar and the youth, whom he saluted, saying, "Ho thou the Wazir and Prince Sans peer, believe not the words of this youth. Of a surety none murdered the damsel but I. Take her wreak on me this moment, for, an thou do not thus, I will require it of thee before Almighty Allah." Then quoth the young man, "O Wazir, this is an old man in his dotage who wotteth not whatso he saith ever, and I am he who murdered her, so do thou avenge her on me." Quoth the old man, "O my son, thou art young and desirest the joys of the world, and I am old and weary and surfeited with the world. I will offer my life as a ransom for thee and for the Wazir and his cousins. No one murdered the damsel but I, so Allah upon thee, make haste to hang me, for no life is left in me now that hers is gone." The Wazir marvelled much at all this strangeness and, taking the young man and the old man, carried them before the Caliph, where, after kissing the ground 7 times between his hands, he said, "O Commander of the Faithful, I bring thee the murderer of the damsel." "Where is he?" asked the Caliph, and Ja'afar answered, "This young man saith, I am the murderer, and this old man giving him the lie saith, I am the murderer, and behold, here are the twain standing before thee." The Caliph looked at the old man and the young man and asked, "Which of you killed the girl?" The young man replied, "No one slew her save I," and the old man answered, "Indeed none killed her but myself." Then said the Caliph to Ja'afar, "Take the twain and hang them both." But Ja'afar rejoined, since one of them was the murderer, to hang the other were mere injustice. "By him who raised the firmament and dispread the earth like a carpet," cried the youth, "I am he who slew the damsel." And he went on to describe the manner of her murder and the basket, the mantilla and the bit of carpet, in fact all that the Caliph had found upon her. So the Caliph was certified that the young man was the murderer, whereat he wondered and asked him, "What was the cause of thy wrongfully doing this damsel to die, and what made thee confess the murder without the bastinado, and what brought thee here to yield up thy life, and what made thee say do her wreak upon me?" The youth answered, "Know, O Commander of the Faithful, that this woman was my wife and the mother of my children, also my first cousin and the daughter of my paternal uncle, this old man who is my father's own brother. When I married her she was a maid, and Allah blessed me with 3 male children by her. She loved me and served me, and I saw no evil in her, for I also loved her with fondest love. Now on the first day of this month she fell ill with grievous sickness, and I fetched in physicians to her, but recovery came to her little by little. And, when I wished her to go to the hammam bath, she said, 'There is a something I long for before I go to the bath, and I long for it with an exceeding longing.' 'To hear is to comply,' said I, 'and what is it?' Quoth she, 'I have a queasy craving for an apple, to smell it and bite a bit of it.' I replied, 'Hadst thou 1,000 longings I would try to satisfy them.' So I went on the instant into the city and sought for apples but could find none. Yet, had they cost a gold piece each, would I have bought them. I was vexed at this and went home and said, 'O daughter of my uncle, by Allah I can find none.' She was distressed, being yet very weakly, and her weakness increased greatly on her that night, and I felt anxious and alarmed on her account. As soon as morning dawned I went out again and made the round of the gardens, one by one, but found no apples anywhere. At last there met me an old gardener, of whom I asked about them, and he answered, 'O my son, this fruit is a rarity with us and is not now to be found save in the garden of the Commander of the Faithful at Bassorah, where the gardener keepeth it for the caliph's eating. I returned to my house troubled by my ill success, and my love for my wife and my affection moved me to undertake the journey. So I gat me ready and set out and travelled 15 days and nights, going and coming, and brought her 3 apples which I bought from the gardener for 3 dinars. But when I went in to my wife and set them before her, she took no pleasure in them and let them lie by her side, for her weakness and fever had increased on her and her malady lasted without abating 10 days, after which time she began to recover health. So I left my house and betaking me to my shop sat there buying and selling, and about midday behold, a great ugly black slave, long as a lance and broad as a bench, passed by my shop holding in hand one of the 3 apples wherewith he was playing. Quoth I, O my good slave, tell me whence thou tookest that apple, that I may get the like of it. He laughed and answered, I got it from my mistress, for I had been absent and on my return I found her lying ill with 3 apples by her side, and she said to me, my horned whittle of a husband made a journey for them to Bassorah and bought them for 3 dinars. So I ate and drank with her and took this one from her. When I heard such words from the slave, O Commander of the Faithful, the world grew black before my face, and I arose and locked up my shop and went home beside myself for excess of rage. I looked for the apples and finding only 2 of the 3 asked my wife, O my cousin, where is the 3rd apple? And raising her head languidly she answered, I wot not, O son of my uncle, where 'tis gone. This convinced me that the slave had spoken the truth, so I took a knife and coming behind her got upon her breast without a word said and cut her throat. Then I hewed off her head and her limbs in pieces and, wrapping her in her mantilla and a rag of carpet, hurriedly sewed up the hole which I set in a chest and, locking it tight, loaded it on my he-mule and threw it into the Tigris with my own hands. So Allah upon thee, O Commander of the Faithful, make haste to hang me, as I fear lest she appeal for vengeance on resurrection day. For, when I had thrown her into the river and none knew aught of it, as I went back home I found my eldest son crying and yet he knew naught of what I had done with his mother. I asked him, What hath made thee weep, my boy? And he answered, I took one of the 3 apples which were by my mammy and went down into the lane to play with my brethren when behold, a big long black slave snatched it from my hand and said, Whence hadst thou this? Quoth I, my father travelled far for it, and brought it from Bassorah for my mother who was ill and 2 other apples for which he paid 3 ducats. He took no heed of my words and I asked for the apple a 2nd and a 3rd time, but he cuffed me and kicked me and went off with it. I was afraid lest my mother should swinge me on account of the apple, so for fear of her I went with my brother outside the city and stayed there till evening closed in upon us, and indeed I am in fear of her, and now by Allah, O my father, say nothing to her of this or it may add to her ailment. When I heard what my child said I knew that the slave was he who had foully slandered my wife, the daughter of my uncle, and was certified that I had slain her wrong. Fully. So I wept with exceeding weeping and presently this old man, my paternal uncle and her father, came in, and I told him what had happened and he sat down by my side and wept and we ceased not weeping till midnight. We have kept up mourning for her these last 5 days and we lamented her in the deepest sorrow for that she was unjustly done to die. This came from the gratuitous lying of the slave, the blackamoor, and this was the manner of my killing her. So I conjure thee, by the honour of thine ancestors, make haste to kill me and do her justice upon me, as there is no living for me after her. The Caliph marvelled at his words and said, By Allah, the young man is excusable. I will hang none but the accursed slave and I will do a deed which shall comfort the ill at ease and suffering, and which shall please the all-glorious king. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of day and ceased saying her permitted say. When it was the 20th night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the Caliph swore he would hang none but the slave, for the youth was excusable. Then he turned to Ja'afar and said to him, Bring before me this accursed slave who was the sole cause of this calamity, and, if thou bring him not before me within 3 days, thou shalt be slain in his stead. So Ja'afar fared forth weeping and saying, 2 deaths have already beset me, nor shall the crock come of safe from every shock. In this matter craft and cunning are of no avail, but he who preserved my life the first time can preserve it a second time. By Allah, I will not leave my house during the 3 days of life which remain to me and let the truth, whose perfection be praise, do e'en as he will. So he kept his house 3 days, and on the 4th day he summoned the causes and legal witnesses and made his last will and testament, and took leave of his children weeping. Presently in came a messenger from the Caliph and said to him, The commander of the faithful is in the most violent rage that can be, and he sendeth to seek thee, and he sweareth that the day shall certainly not pass without thy being hanged unless the slave be forthcoming. When Ja'afar heard this he wept, and his children and slaves and all who were in the house wept with him. After he had bidden adieu to everybody except his youngest daughter, he proceeded to farewell her, for he loved this wee one, who was a beautiful child, more than all his other children, and he pressed her to his breast and kissed her and wept bitterly at parting from her, when he felt something round inside the bosom of her dress and asked her, O my little maid, what is in thy bosom pocket? O my father, she replied, it is an apple with the name of our Lord the Caliph written upon it. Rayhan our slave brought it to me 4 days ago and would not let me have it till I gave him 2 dinars for it. When Ja'afar heard speak of the slave and the apple, he was glad and put his hand into his child's pocket and drew out the apple and knew it and rejoiced, saying, O ready dispeller of trouble. Then he bade them bring the slave and said to him, Fie upon thee, Rayhan, whence hadst thou this apple? By Allah, O my master, he replied, though a lie may get a man once off, yet may truth get him off, and well off, again and again. I did not steal this apple from thy palace nor from the gardens of the commander of the faithful. The fact is that 5 days ago, as I was walking along one of the alleys of this city, I saw some little ones at play and this apple in hand of one of them. So I snatched it from him and beat him, and he cried and said, O youth, this apple is my mother's and she is ill. She told my father how she longed for an apple, so he travelled to Basora and bought her 3 apples for 3 gold pieces, and I took one of them to play withal. He wept again, but I paid no heed to what he said and carried it off and brought it here, and my little lady bought it of me for 2 dinars of gold. And this is the whole story. When Ja'afar heard his words he marveled that the murder of the damsel and all this misery should have been caused by his slave. He grieved for the relation of the slave to himself, while rejoicing over his own deliverance, and he repeated these lines. If ill betide thee through thy slave, make him forthright thy sacrifice, O many serviles thou shalt find. But life comes once and never twice. Then he took the slave's hand and, leading him to the Caliph, related the story from first to last, and the Caliph marveled with extreme astonishment, and laughed till he fell on his back, and ordered that the story be recorded and be made public amongst the people. But Ja'afar said, Marvel not, O Commander of the Faithful, at this adventure, for it is not more wondrous than the history of the Wazir Nur al-Din Ali of Egypt and his brother Shams al-Din Mohammed. Quoth the Caliph, Out with it. But what can be stranger than this story? And Ja'afar answered, O Commander of the Faithful, I will not tell it thee, save on condition that thou pardon my slave. And the Caliph rejoined, If it be indeed more wondrous than that of the 3 apples, I grant thee his blood, and if not I will surely slay thy slave. So Ja'afar began in these words the tale of Nur al-Din and his son. Know, O Commander of the Faithful, that in times of yore the land of Egypt was ruled by a sultan endowed with justice and generosity, one who loved the pious poor and companied with the ulama and learned men, and he had a wazir, a wise and an experienced, well-versed in affairs and in the art of government. This minister, who was a very old man, had 2 sons, as they were 2 moons. Never man saw the like of them for beauty and grace, the elder called Shams al-Din Mohammed and the younger Nur al-Din Ali, but the younger excelled the elder in seemliness and pleasing semblance, so that folk heard his fame in far countries and men flocked to Egypt for the purpose of seeing him. In course of time their father, the wazir, died and was deeply regretted and mourned by the sultan, who sent for his 2 sons and, investing them with dresses of honor, said to them, Let not your hearts be troubled, for ye shall stand in your father's stead and be joint ministers of Egypt. At this they rejoiced and kissed the ground before him and performed the ceremonial mourning for their father during a full month, after which time they entered upon the wazirate, and the power passed into their hands as it had been in the hands of their father, each doing duty for a week at a time. They lived under the same roof and their word was one, and whenever the Sultan desired to travel they took it by turns to be in attendance on him. It fortuned one night that the Sultan purposed setting out on a journey next morning, and the elder, whose turn it was to accompany him, was sitting conversing with his brother and said to him, "O my brother, it is my wish that we both marry, I and thou, two sisters, and go in to our wives on one and the same night." "Do, O my brother, as thou desirest," the younger replied, "for right is thy recking and surely I will comply with thee in whatso thou sayest." So they agreed upon this, and quoth Shams al-Din, "If Allah decree that we marry two damsels and go into them on the same night, and they shall conceive on their bride nights and bear children to us on the same day, and by Allah's will thy wife bear thee a son and my wife bear me a daughter, let us wed them either to other, for they will be cousins." Quoth Nur al-Din, "O my brother, Shams al-Din, what dower wilt thou require from my son for thy daughter?" Quoth Shams al-Din, "I will take 3,000 dinars and 3 pleasure gardens and 3 farms, and it would not be seemly that the youth make contract for less than this." When Nur al-Din heard such demand he said, "What manner of dower is this thou wouldest impose upon my son? Wottest thou not that we are brothers and both by Allah's grace waisers and equal in office? It behoveth thee to offer thy daughter to my son without marriage settlement, or if one need be, it should represent a mere nominal value by way of show to the world, for thou knowest that the masculine is worthier than the feminine, and my son is a male and our memory will be preserved by him, not by thy daughter." "But what," said Shams al-Din, "is she to have?" And Nur al-Din continued, "Through her we shall not be remembered among the emirs of the earth, but I see thou wouldest do with me according to the saying, and thou wouldst bluff off a buyer, ask him high price and higher, or as did a man who, they say, went to a friend and asked something of him being in necessity and was answered, 'Bismillah, in the name of Allah, I will do all what thou requirest but come tomorrow.' Whereupon the other replied in this verse, 'When he who is asked a favor saith tomorrow, the wise man what's 'tis vain to beg or borrow.' Quoth Shams al-Din, 'Basta, I see thee fail in respect to me by making thy son of more account than my daughter, and 'tis plain that thine understanding is of the meanest and that thou lackest manners. Thou remindest me of thy partnership in the Wazirate, when I admitted thee to share with me only in pity for thee, and not wishing to mortify thee, and that thou mightest help me as a manner of assistant. But since thou talkest on this wise, by Allah, I will never marry my daughter to thy son, no, not for her weight in gold." When Nur al-Din heard his brother's words he waxed wroth and said, "And I too, I will never, never marry my son to thy daughter, no, not to keep from my lips the cup of death." Shams al-Din replied, "I would not accept him as a husband for her, and he is not worth a paring of her nail. Were I not about to travel I would make an example of thee, however when I return thou shalt see, and I will show thee, how I can assert my dignity and vindicate my honor. But Allah doeth whatso he willeth." When Nur al-Din heard this speech from his brother, he was filled with fury and lost his wits for rage, but he hid what he felt and held his peace, and each of the brothers passed the night in a place far apart, wild with wrath against the other. As soon as morning dawned the Sultan fared forth in state and crossed over from Cairo to Giza and made for the pyramids, accompanied by the Wazir Shams al-Din, whose turn of duty it was, whilst his brother Nur al-Din, who passed the night in sore rage, rose with the light and prayed the dawn prayer. Then he betook himself to his treasury and, taking a small pair of saddlebags, filled them with gold, and he called to mind his brother's threats and the contempt wherewith he had treated him, and he repeated these couplets. "Travel, and thou shalt find new friends for old ones left behind. Toil, for the sweets of human life by toil and moil are found. The stay-at-home no honor wins nor aught attains but want. So leave thy place of birth and wander all the world around. I've seen, and very oft I've seen, how standing water stinks. And only flowing sweetens it and trotting makes it sound, and were the moon forever full and ne'er to wax or wane. Man would not strain his watchful eyes to see its gladsome round, except the lion leave his lair he ne'er would fell his game. Except the arrow leave the bow ne'er had it reached its bound, gold dust is dust the while it lies untravelled in the mine. And aloes wood mere fuel is upon its native ground, and gold shall win his highest worth when from his goal ungold. And aloes sent to foreign parts grows costlier than gold. When he ended his verse, he bade one of his pages saddle him his Nubian mare-mule with her padded selle. Now she was a dapple grey, with ears like reed pens and legs like columns and a back high and strong as a dome builded on pillars. Her saddle was of gold cloth and her stirrups of Indian steel, and her housing of Isfahan velvet. She had trappings which would serve the Chosroes, and she was like a bride adorned for her wedding night. Moreover, he bade lay on her back a piece of silk for a seat, and a prayer carpet under which were his saddlebags. When this was done, he said to his pages and slaves, I purpose going forth pleasuring outside the city on the road to Caliub town, and I shall lie 3 nights abroad, so let none of you follow me, for there is something straiteneth my breast. Then he mounted the mule in haste, and, taking with him some provaunt for the way, set out from Cairo and faced the open and uncultivated country lying around it. About noontide he entered Bilbay's city, where he dismounted and stayed a while to rest himself and his mule and ate some of his victual. He bought at Bilbay's all he wanted for himself and forage for his mule and then fared on the way of the waste. Towards nightfall he entered a town called Sa'adiyah, where he alighted and took out somewhat of his viaticum and ate. Then he spread his strip of silk on the sand and set the saddlebags under his head and slept in the open air, for he was still overcome with anger. When morning dawned he mounted and rode onward till he reached the holy city, Jerusalem, and thence he made Aleppo, where he dismounted at one of the caravanserais and abode 3 days to rest himself and the mule and to smell the air. Then, being determined to travel afar and Allah having written safety in his fate, he set out again, wending without wotting whither he was going, and, having fallen in with certain couriers, he stinted not travelling till he had reached Bassorah city, albeit he knew not what the place was. It was dark night when he alighted at the khan, so he spread out his prayer carpet and took down the saddlebags from the back of the mule and gave her with her furniture in charge of the doorkeeper that he might walk her about. The man took her and did as he was bid. Now it so happened that the Wazir of Bassorah, a man shot in years, was sitting at the lattice window of his palace opposite the khan, and he saw the porter walking the mule up and down. He was struck by her trappings of price and thought her a nice beast fit for the riding of wazirs or even of royalties, and the more he looked the more was he perplexed, till at last he said to one of his pages, Bring hither yon doorkeeper. The page went and returned to the wazir with the porter, who kissed the ground between his hands, and the minister asked him, Who is the owner of yonder mule and what manner of man is he? And he answered, O my lord, the owner of this mule is a comely young man of pleasant manners, withal grave and dignified, and doubtless one of the sons of the merchants. When the wazir heard the doorkeeper's words, he arose forthright, and, mounting his horse, rode to the khan and went in to Nur al-Din, who, seeing the minister making towards him, rose to his feet and advanced to meet him and saluted him. The wazir welcomed him to Bassorah and dismounting, embraced him and made him sit down by his side and said, O my son, whence comest thou and what dost thou seek? O my lord, Nur al-Din replied, I have come from Cairo city, of which my father was whilome wazir, but he hath been removed to the grace of Allah, and he informed him of all that had befallen him from beginning to end, adding, I am resolved never to return home before I have seen all the cities and countries of the world. When the wazir heard this, he said to him, O my son, hearken not to the voice of passion, lest it cast thee into the pit, for indeed many regions be waste places, and I fear for thee the turns of time. Then he let load the saddlebags and the silk and prayer carpets on the mule and carried Nur al-Din to his own house, where he lodged him in a pleasant place and entreated him honorably and made much of him, for he inclined to love him with exceeding love. After a while he said to him, O my son, here am I left a man in years and have no male children, but Allah hath blessed me with a daughter who eveneth thee in beauty, and I have rejected all her many suitors, men of rank and substance. But affection for thee hath entered into my heart. Say me, then, wilt thou be to her a husband? If thou accept this, I will go up with thee to the Sultan of Bassorah and will tell him that thou art my nephew, the son of my brother, and bring thee to be appointed wazir in my place, that I may keep the house, for, by Allah, O my son, I am stricken in years and aweary. When Nur al-Din heard the wazir's words, he bowed his head in modesty and said, To hear is to obey. At this the wazir rejoiced and bade his servants prepare a feast and decorate the great assembly hall, wherein they were wont to celebrate the marriages of emirs and grandees. Then he assembled his friends and the notables of the reign and the merchants of Bassora, and when all stood before him he said to them, I had a brother who was Wazir in the land of Egypt, and Allah Almighty blessed him with 2 sons, whilst to me, as well ye wot, he hath given a daughter. My brother charged me to marry my daughter to one of his sons, whereto I assented, and, when my daughter was of age to marry, he sent me one of his sons, the young man now present, to whom I purpose marrying her, drawing up the contract and celebrating the night of unveiling with due ceremony. For he is nearer and dearer to me than a stranger, and, after the wedding, if he please he shall abide with me, or if he desire to travel I will forward him and his wife to his father's home. Hereat one and all replied, Right is thy recking, and they all looked at the bridegroom and were pleased with him. So the Wazir sent for the Qazi and legal witnesses, and they wrote out the marriage contract, after which the slaves perfumed the guests with incense, and served them with sherbet of sugar and sprinkled rosewater on them, and all went their ways. Then the Wazir bade his servants take Nur al-Din to the Hammam baths and sent him a suit of the best of his own especial raiment, and napkins, and towelry and bowls and perfume burners and all else that was required. After the bath, when he came out and donned the dress, he was even as the full moon on the 14th night, and he mounted his mule and stayed not till he reached the Wazir's palace. There he dismounted and went in to the minister and kissed his hands, and the Wazir bade him welcome. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of day and ceased to say her permitted say. When it was the 21st night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the Wazir stood up to him and welcoming him said, Arise, and go in to thy wife this night, and on the morrow I will carry thee to the Sultan, and pray Allah bless thee with all manner of weal. So Nur al-Din left him and went in to his wife the Wazir's daughter. Thus far concerning him, but as regards his elder brother, Shams al-Din, he was absent with the Sultan a long time, and when he returned from his journey he found not his brother, and he asked of his servants and slaves, who answered, On the day of thy departure with the Sultan, thy brother mounted his mule fully caparisoned as for state procession, saying, I am going towards Caliab town, and I shall be absent 1 day or at most 2 days, for my breast is straitened, and let none of you follow me. Then he fared forth, and from that time to this we have heard no tidings of him. Shams al-Din was greatly troubled at the sudden disappearance of his brother, and grieved with exceeding grief at the loss, and said to himself, This is only because I chided and upbraided him the night before my departure with the Sultan. Haply his feelings were hurt and he fared forth a-travelling, but I must send after him. Then he went in to the Sultan and acquainted him with what had happened, and wrote letters and dispatches, which he sent by running footmen to his deputies in every province. But during the 20 days of his brother's absence Nur al-Din had travelled far and had reached Bassora, so after diligent search the messengers failed to come at any news of him and returned. Thereupon Shams al-Din despaired of finding his brother and said, Indeed I went beyond all bounds in what I said to him with reference to the marriage of our children. Would that I had not done so. This all cometh of my lack of wit and want of caution. Soon after this he sought in marriage the daughter of a Cairene merchant, and drew up the marriage contract and went in to her. And it so chanced that, on the very same night when Shams al-Din went in to his wife, Nur al-Din also went in to his wife the daughter of the Wazir of Bassora, this being in accordance with the will of Almighty Allah, that he might deal the decrees of destiny to his creatures. Furthermore, it was as the 2 brothers had said, for their 2 wives became pregnant by them on the same night, and both were brought to bed on the same day. The wife of Shams al-Din, Wazir of Egypt, of a daughter, never in Cairo was seen a fairer, and the wife of Nur al-Din of a son, none more beautiful was ever seen in his time, as one of the poets said concerning the like of him. That jetty hair, that glossy brow, my slender-waisted youth, of thine, can darkness round creation throw, or make it brightly shine. The dusky mole that faintly shows upon his cheek, blame it not, the tulip flower never blows undarkened by its spot. And as another also said, his scent was musk and his cheek was rose. His teeth are pearls and his lips drop wine, his form is a brand and his hips a hill. His hair is night and his face moonshine. They named the boy Bad al-Din Hassan, and his grandfather, the Wazir of Bassora, rejoiced in him and, on the 7th day after his birth, made entertainments and spread banquets which would befit the birth of kings' sons and heirs. Then he took Nur al-Din and went up with him to the Sultan, and his son-in-law, when he came before the presence of the king, kissed the ground between his hands and repeated these verses, for he was ready of speech, firm of sprite and good in heart as he was goodly in form. The world's best joys long be thy lot, my lord. And last while darkness and the dawn o'erlap, O thou who makest, when we greet thy gifts, the world to dance and time his palms to clap. Then the Sultan rose up to honor them, and thanking Nur al-Din for his fine compliment, asked the Wazir, who may be this young man, and the minister answered, this is my brother's son, and related his tale from first to last. Quoth the Sultan, and how comes he to be thy nephew, and we have never heard speak of him? Quoth the minister, O our lord the Sultan, I had a brother who was Wazir in the land of Egypt, and he died, leaving 2 sons, whereof the elder hath taken his father's place, and the younger, whom thou serest, came to me. I had sworn I would not marry my daughter to any but to him, so when he came I married him to her. Now he is young and I am old, my hearing is dulled and my judgment is easily fooled, wherefore I would solicit our lord the Sultan to set him in my stead, for he is my brother's son and my daughter's husband, and he is fit for the wazirate, being a man of good counsel and ready contrivance. The Sultan looked at Nur al-Din and liked him, so he stablished him in office as the Wazir had requested and formally appointed him, presenting him with a splendid dress of honor and a she-mule from his private stud, and assigning to him solde, stipends, and supplies. Nur al-Din kissed the Sultan's hand and went home, he and his father-in-law, joying with exceeding joy and saying, all this followeth on the heels of the boy Hassan's birth. Next day he presented himself before the king and, kissing the ground, began repeating, grow thy weal and thy welfare day by day, and thy luck prevail o'er the envious spite, and ne'er cease thy days to be white as day, and thy foeman's day to be black as night. The Sultan bade him be seated on the Wazir's seat, so he sat down and applied himself to the business of his office and went into the cases of the lieges and their suits, as is the wont of ministers, while the Sultan watched him and wondered at his wit and good sense, judgment and insight. Wherefore he loved him and took him into intimacy. When the divan was dismissed, Nur al-Din returned to his house and related what had passed to his father-in-law, who rejoiced. And thenceforward Nur al-Din ceased not so to administer the wazirate that the Sultan would not be parted from him night or day, and increased his stipend and supplies until his means were ample, and he became the owner of ships that made trading voyages at his command, as well as of Mamelukes and blackamoor slaves. And he laid out many estates and set up Persian wheels and planted gardens. When his son Hassan was 4 years of age, the old Wazir deceased, and he made for his father-in-law a sumptuous funeral ceremony ere he was laid in the dust. Then he occupied himself with the education of this son, and, when the boy waxed strong and came to the age of 7, he brought him a faqih, a doctor of law and religion, to teach him in his own house, and charged him to give him a good education and instruct him in politeness and good manners. So the tutor made the boy read and retain all varieties of useful knowledge, after he had spent some years in learning the Quran by heart, and he ceased not to grow in beauty and stature and symmetry, even as saith the poet. In his face sky shines the fullest moon. In his cheeks anemone glows the sun, he so conquered beauty that he hath won all charms of humanity one by one. The professor brought him up in his father's palace, teaching him reading, writing, and ciphering, theology and belles lettres. His grandfather, the old Wazir, had bequeathed to him the whole of his property when he was but 4 years of age. Now during all the time of his earliest youth he had never left the house, till on a certain day his father, the Wazir Nur al-Din, clad him in his best clothes and, mounting him on a she-mule of the finest, went up with him to the Sultan. The king gazed at Bad al-Din Hassan and marveled at his comeliness and loved him. As for the city folk, when he first passed before them with his father, they marveled at his exceeding beauty and sat down on the road expecting his return, that they might look their fill on his beauty and loveliness and symmetry and perfect grace, even as the poet said in these verses. As the sage watched the stars, the semblance clear of a fair youth on scroll he saw appear. Those jetty locks canopus o'er him threw, and tinged his temple curls a musky hue. Mars dyed his ruddy cheek, and from his eyes the archer-star his glittering arrow flies. His wit from Hermes came, and Sohar's care, the half-seen star that dimly haunts the bear, kept off all evil eyes that threaten and ensnare. The sage stood mazed to see such fortunes meet, and Luna kissed the earth beneath his feet. And they blessed him aloud as he passed and called upon Almighty Allah to bless him. The Sultan entreated the lad with especial favor and said to his father, "O Wazir, thou must needs bring him daily to my presence," whereupon he replied, "I hear and I obey." Then the Wazir returned home with his son and ceased not to carry him to court till he reached the age of 20. At that time the minister sickened and, sending for Badr al-Din Hassan, said to him, "Know, O my son, that the world of the present is but a house of mortality, while that of the future is a house of eternity. I wish, before I die, to bequeath thee certain charges, and do thou take heed of what I say and incline thy heart to my words." Then he gave him his last instructions as to the properest way of dealing with his neighbors and the due management of his affairs, after which he called to mind his brother and his home and his native land and wept over his separation from those he had first loved. Then he wiped away his tears and, turning to his son, said to him, "Before I proceed, O my son, to my last charges and injunctions, know that I have a brother, and thou hast an uncle, Shams al-Din Height, the Wazir of Cairo, which whom I parted, leaving him against his will. Now take thee a sheet of paper and write upon it whatso I say to thee." Badr al-Din took a fair leaf and set about doing his father's bidding, and he wrote thereon a full account of what had happened to his sire first and last, the dates of his arrival at Bassorah and of his foregathering with the Wazir, of his marriage, of his going in to the minister's daughter and of the birth of his son, brief, his life of 40 years from the date of his dispute with his brother, adding the words, "And this is written at my dictation, and may Almighty Allah be with him when I am gone." Then he folded the paper and sealed it and said, "O Hassan, O my son, keep this paper with all care, for it will enable thee to establish thine origin and rank and lineage, and, if anything contrary befall thee, set out for Cairo and ask for thine uncle and show him this paper and say to him that I died a stranger far from mine own people and full of yearning to see him and them." So Badr al-Din Hassan took the document and folded it, and, wrapping it up in a piece of waxed cloth, sewed it like a talisman between the inner and outer cloth of his skullcap and wound his light turband round it. And he fell to weeping over his father and at parting with him, and he but a boy. Then Nur al-Din lapsed into a swoon, the forerunner of death, but presently recovering himself he said, "O Hassan, O my son, I will now bequeath to thee 5 last behests. The first behest is, be over intimate with none, nor frequent any, nor be familiar with any, so shalt thou be safe from his mischief, for security lieth in seclusion of thought and a certain retirement from the society of thy fellows, and I have heard it said by a poet, in this world there is none thou mayst count upon. To befriend thy case in the nick of need, so live for thyself nursing hope of none. Such counsel I give thee, enow, take heed. The second behest is, O my son, deal harshly with none lest fortune with thee deal hardly, for the fortune of this world is one day with thee and another day against thee, and all worldly goods are but a loan to be repaid. And I have heard a poet say, take thought nor haste to win the thing thou wilt. Have ruth on man, for ruth thou mayest require, no hand is there but Allah's hand is higher. No tyrant but shall rue worse tyrant sire. The third behest is, learn to be silent in society and let thine own faults distract thine attention from the faults of other men, for it is said, in silence dwelleth safety, and thereon I have heard the lines that tell us, reserve's a jewel, silence safety is. Whenas thou speakest many a word withhold, for an of silence thou repent thee once. Of speech thou shalt repent times manifold. The fourth behest, O my son, is beware of wine-bibbing, for wine is the head of all frowardness and a fine solvent of human wits. So shun, and again I say, shun mixing strong liquor, for I have heard a poet say, from wine I turn and whoso wine cups swill. Becoming one of those who deem it ill, wine driveth man to miss salvation way, and opes the gateway wide to sins that kill. The fifth behest, O my son, is keep thy wealth and it will keep thee, guard thy money and it will guard thee, and waste not thy substance lest haply thou come to want and must fare a begging from the meanest of mankind. Save thy dirhams and deem them the sovereignest salve for the wounds of the world. And here again I have heard that one of the poets said, When fails my wealth no friend will deign befriend. When wealth abounds all friends their friendship tender, how many friends lent aid my wealth to spend? But friends to lack of wealth no friendship render. On this wise Nur al-Din ceased not to counsel his son Bad al-Din Hassan till his hour came and, sighing one sobbing sigh, his life went forth. Then the voice of mourning and keening rose high in his house and the Sultan and all the grandees grieved for him and buried him, but his son ceased not lamenting his loss for 2 months, during which he never mounted horse, nor attended the divan nor presented himself before the Sultan. At last the king, being wroth with him, stablished in his stead one of his chamberlains and made him wazir, giving orders to seize and set seals on all Nur al-Din's houses and goods and domains. So the new wazir went forth with a mighty posse of chamberlains and people of the divan, and watchmen and a host of idlers to do this and to seize Bad al-Din Hassan and carry him before the king, who would deal with him as he deemed fit. Now there was among the crowd of followers a Mameluke of the deceased wazir who, when he heard this order, urged his horse and rode at full speed to the house of Bad al-Din Hassan, for he could not endure to see the ruin of his old master's son. He found him sitting at the gate with head hung down and sorrowing, as was his wont, for the loss of his father. So he dismounted and kissing his hand said to him, "O my lord and son of my lord, haste ere ruin come and lay waste." When Hassan heard this he trembled and asked, "What may be the matter?" And the man answered, "The Sultan is angered with thee and hath issued a warrant against thee, and evil cometh hard upon my track, so flee with thy life." At these words Hassan's heart flamed with the fire of bale, and his rose-red cheek turned pale, and he said to the Mameluke, "O my brother, is there time for me to go in and get me some worldly gear which may stand me in stead during my strangerhood?" But the slave replied, "O my lord, up at once and save thyself and leave this house, while it is yet time." And he quoted these lines: "Escape with thy life, if oppression betide thee, and let the house of its builder's fate, country for country thou'lt find, if thou seek it. Life for life never, early or late. It is strange men should dwell in the house of abjection, when the plain of God's earth is so wide and so great." At these words of the Mameluke, Bad al-Din covered his head with the skirt of his garment and went forth on foot till he stood outside of the city, where he heard folk saying, "The Sultan hath sent his new wazir to the house of the old wazir, now no more, to seal his property and seize his son Bad al-Din Hassan and take him before the presence, that he may put him to death." And all cried, "Alas for his beauty and his loveliness." When he heard this he fled forth at hazard, knowing not whither he was going, and gave not over hurrying onwards till destiny drove him to his father's tomb. So he entered the cemetery and, threading his way through the graves, at last he reached the sepulchre where he sat down and let fall from his head the skirt of his long robe which was made of brocade with a gold-embroidered hem whereon were worked these couplets: "O thou whose forehead, like the radiant east, tells of the stars of heaven and bounteous dews, endure thine honour to the latest day, and time thy growth of glory ne'er refuse." While he was sitting by his father's tomb behold, there came to him a Jew as he were a shroff, a money changer, with a pair of saddlebags containing much gold, who accosted him and kissed his hand, saying, "Whither bound, O my lord? 'Tis late in the day and thou art clad but lightly, and I read signs of trouble in thy face." "I was sleeping within this very hour," answered Hassan, "when my father appeared to me and chid me for not having visited his tomb. So I awoke trembling and came hither forthright lest the day should go by without my visiting him, which would have been grievous to me." "O my lord," rejoined the Jew, "thy father had many merchantmen at sea and, as some of them are now due, it is my wish to buy of thee the cargo of the first ship that cometh into port with this 1,000 dinars of gold." "I consent," quoth Hassan, whereupon the Jew took out a bag full of gold and counted out 1,000 sequins which he gave to Hassan, the son of the wazir, saying, "Write me a letter of sale and seal it." So Hassan took a pen and paper and wrote these words in duplicate: "The writer, Hassan Bad al-Din, son of wazir Nur al-Din, hath sold to Isaac the Jew all the cargo of the first of his father's ships which cometh into port, for 1,000 dinars, and he hath received the price in advance. And after he had taken one copy, the Jew put it into his pouch and went away. But Hassan fell a weeping as he thought of the dignity and prosperity which had erst been his, and he began reciting. This house, my lady, since you left is now a home no more. For me, nor neighbours, since you left, prove kind and neighbourly. The friend, whileer I took to heart, alas, no more to me is friend, and even Luna's self displayeth lunacy. You left, and by your going left the world a waste, a wold. And lies a gloomy murk upon the face of hill and lea. O may the raven bird whose cry our hapless parting croaked, find ne'er a nesty home and eke shed all his plumery. At length my patience fails me, and this absence wastes my flesh. How many a veil by severance rent our eyes are doomed see. Ah, shall I ever sight again our fair past nights of yore? And shall a single house become a home for me once more? Then he wept with exceeding weeping, and night came upon him. So he leant his head against his father's grave, and sleep overcame him. Glory to him who sleepeth not. He ceased not slumbering till the moon rose, when his head slipped from off the tomb, and he lay on his back, with limbs outstretched, his face shining bright in the moonlight. Now the cemetery was haunted day and night by jinns who were of the true believers, and presently came out a Jinniah who, seeing Hassan asleep, marveled at his beauty and loveliness and cried, Glory to God! This youth can be none other than one of the Walden of Paradise. Then she flew firmamentwards to circle it, as was her custom, and met an Ifrit on the wing who saluted her, and she said to him, Whence comest thou? From Cairo, he replied. Wilt thou come with me and look upon the beauty of a youth who sleepeth in yonder burial place? She asked, and he answered, I will. So they flew till they lighted at the tomb, and she showed him the youth and said, Now didst thou ever in thy born days see aught like this? The Ifrit looked upon him and exclaimed, Praise be to him that hath no equal. But, O my sister, shall I tell thee what I have seen this day? Asked she, What is that? And he answered, I have seen the counterpart of this youth in the land of Egypt. She is the daughter of the Wazir Shams al-Din, and she is a model of beauty and loveliness, of fairest favour and formous form, and dight with symmetry and perfect grace. When she had reached the age of 19, the Sultan of Egypt heard of her and, sending for the Wazir her father, said to him, Hear me, O Wazir. It hath reached mine ear that thou hast a daughter, and I wish to demand her of thee in marriage. The Wazir replied, O our lord the Sultan, deign accept my excuses and take compassion on my sorrows, for thou knowest that my brother, who was partner with me in the Wazirate, disappeared from amongst us many years ago, and we wot not where he is. Now the cause of his departure was that one night, as we were sitting together and talking of wives and children to come, we had words on the matter, and he went off in high dudgeon. But I swore that I would marry my daughter to none save to the son of my brother on the day her mother gave her birth, which was nigh upon 19 years ago. I have lately heard that my brother died at Basora, where he had married the daughter of the Wazir, and that she bare him a son, and I will not marry my daughter but to him in honor of my brother's memory. I recorded the date of my marriage and the conception of my wife and the birth of my daughter, and from her horoscope I find that her name is conjoined with that of her cousin, and there are damsels in forison for our lord the Sultan. The king, hearing his minister's answer and refusal, waxed wroth with exceeding wrath and cried, When the like of me asketh a girl in marriage of the like of thee, he conferreth an honor, and thou rejectest me and puttest me off with cold excuse. Now, by the life of my head I will marry her to the meanest of my men in spite of the nose of thee. There was in the palace a horse-groom which was a gobo with a bunch to his breast and a hunch to his back, and the Sultan sent for him and married him to the daughter of the Wazir, lief or loath, and hath ordered a pompous marriage procession for him, and that he go in to his bride this very night. I have now just flown hither from Cairo, where I left the hunchback at the door of the Hammam bath amidst the Sultan's white slaves who were waving lighted flambeaux about him. As for the minister's daughter, she sitteth among her nurses and tirewomen, weeping and wailing, for they have forbidden her father to come near her. Never have I seen, O my sister, more hideous being than this hunchback, whilst the young lady is the likest of all folk to this young man, albeit even fairer than he. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of day and ceased saying her permitted say. When it was the 22nd night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the Jinnee narrated to the Jinniyah how the king had caused the wedding contract to be drawn up between the hunchbacked groom and the lovely young lady who was heartbroken for sorrow, and how she was the fairest of created things and even more beautiful than this youth, the Jinniyah cried at him, "Thou liest. This youth is handsomer than any one of his day." The Ifrit gave her the lie again, adding, "By Allah, O my sister, the damsel I speak of is fairer than this, yet none but he deserveth her, for they resemble each other like brother and sister, or at least cousins. And, well away, how she is wasted upon that hunchback." Then said she, "O my brother, let us get under him and lift him up and carry him to Cairo, that we may compare him with the damsel of whom thou speakest and so determine whether of the twain is the fairer." "To hear is to obey," replied he, "thou speakest to the point, nor is there a righter recking than this of thine, and I myself will carry him." So he raised him from the ground and flew with him like a bird soaring in upper air, the Ifrita keeping close by his side at equal speed, till he alighted with him in the city of Cairo and set him down on a stone bench and woke him up. He roused himself, and finding that he was no longer at his father's tomb in Bassorah city, he looked right and left and saw that he was in a strange place, and he would have cried out, but the Ifrit gave him a cuff which persuaded him to keep silence. Then he brought him rich raiment and clothed him therein and, giving him a lighted flambeau, said, "Know that I have brought thee hither, meaning to do thee a good turn for the love of Allah. So take this torch and mingle with the people at the hammam door and walk on with them without stopping till thou reach the house of the wedding festival. Then go boldly forward and enter the great saloon, and fear none, but take thy stand at the right hand of the hunchback bridegroom, and, as often as any of the nurses and tirewomen and singing girls come up to thee, put thy hand into thy pocket which thou wilt find filled with gold. Take it out and throw it to them and spare not, for as often as thou thrustest fingers in pouch thou shalt find it full of coin. Give largesse by handsful and fear nothing, but set thy trust upon him who created thee, for this is not by thine own strength but by that of Allah Almighty, that his decrees may take effect upon his creatures." When Badr al-Din Hassan heard these words from the Ifrit, he said to himself, "Would heaven I knew what all this means and what is the cause of such kindness." However, he mingled with the people and, lighting his flambeau, moved on with the bridal procession till he came to the bath where he found the hunchback already on horseback. Then he pushed his way in among the crowd, a veritable beauty of a man in the finest apparel, wearing tarbush and turband and a long-sleeved robe purfled with gold, and, as often as the singing women stopped for the people to give them largesse, he thrust his hand into his pocket and, finding it full of gold, took out a handful and threw it on the tambourine till he had filled it with gold pieces for the music girls and the tirewomen. The singers were amazed by his bounty, and the people marveled at his beauty and loveliness and the splendor of his dress. He ceased not to do thus till he reached the mansion of the Wazir, who was his uncle, where the chamberlains drove back the people and forbade them to go forward, but the singing girls and the tirewomen said, "By Allah, we will not enter unless this young man enter with us, for he hath given us length o' life with his largesse, and we will not display the bride unless he be present." Therewith they carried him into the bridal hall and made him sit down, defying the evil glances of the hunchbacked bridegroom. The wives of the emirs and wazirs and chamberlains and courtiers all stood in double line, each holding a massy cierge ready lighted. All wore thin face veils, and the 2 rows right and left extended from the bride's throne to the head of the hall adjoining the chamber whence she was to come forth. When the ladies saw Badr al-Din Hassan and noted his beauty and loveliness and his face that shone like the new moon, their hearts inclined to him, and the singing girls said to all that were present, "Know that this beauty crossed our hands with naught but red gold, so be not chary to do him womanly service and comply with all he says, no matter what he ask." So all the women crowded around Hassan with their torches and gazed on his loveliness and envied him his beauty, and one and all would gladly have lain on his bosom an hour or rather a year. Their hearts were so troubled that they let fall their veils from before their faces and said, "Happy she who belongeth to this youth or to whom he belongeth," and they called down curses on the crooked groom and on him who was the cause of his marriage to the girl Beauty. And as often as they blessed Bad al-Din Hassan they damned the hunchback, saying, Verily this youth and none else deserveth our bride. Ah, well away for such a lovely one with this hideous Quasimodo, Allah's curse light on his head and on the Sultan who commanded the marriage. Then the singing girls beat their tabrets and lullalued with joy, announcing the appearing of the bride, and the Wazir's daughter came in surrounded by her tirewomen who had made her goodly to look upon, for they had perfumed her and incensed her and adorned her hair, and they had robed her in raiment and ornaments befitting the mighty Chosro's kings. The most notable part of her dress was a loose robe worn over her other garments. It was diapered in red gold with figures of wild beasts, and birds whose eyes and beaks were of gems, and claws of red rubies and green beryl, and her neck was graced with a necklace of Yamani work, worth thousands of gold pieces, whose bezels were great round jewels of sorts, the like of which was never owned by Kaisar or by Toba king. And the bride was as the full moon when at fullest on 14th night, and as she paced into the hall she was like one of the Houris of heaven, praise be to him who created her in such splendor of beauty. The ladies encompassed her as the white contains the black of the eye, they clustering like stars whilst she shone amongst them like the moon when it eats up the clouds. Now Bad al-Din Hassan of Bassorah was sitting in full gaze of the folk, when the bride came forward with her graceful swaying and swimming gait, and her hunchbacked groom stood up to meet and receive her. She, however, turned away from the white and walked forward till she stood before her cousin Hassan, the son of her uncle. Whereat the people laughed. But when the wedding guests saw her thus attracted towards Bad al-Din they made a mighty clamour and the singing women shouted their loudest, whereupon he put his hand into his pocket and, pulling out a handful of gold, cast it into their tambourines and the girls rejoiced and said, Could we win our wish this bride were thine? At this he smiled and the folk came round him, flambeaux in hand like the eyeball round the pupil, while the Gobo bridegroom was left sitting alone much like a tailless baboon, for every time they lighted a candle for him it went out willy-nilly, so he was left in darkness and silence and looking at naught but himself. When Bad al-Din Hassan saw the bridegroom sitting lonesome in the dark, and all the wedding guests with their flambeaux and wax candles crowding around himself, he was bewildered and marvelled much, but when he looked at his cousin, the daughter of his uncle, he rejoiced and felt an inward delight. He longed to greet her and gazed intently on her face which was radiant with light and brilliancy. Then the tirewomen took off her veil and displayed her in the first bridal dress which was of scarlet satin, and Hassan had a view of her which dazzled his sight and dazed his wits, as she moved to and fro, swaying with graceful gait, and she turned the heads of all the guests, women as well as men, for she was even as Seth the surpassing poet. A sun on wand in knoll of sand she showed. Clad in her cramoisy-hued chemisette, of her lips honeydew she gave me drink, and with her rosy cheeks quenched fire she set. Then they changed that dress and displayed her in a robe of azure, and she reappeared like the full moon when it riseth over the horizon, with her coal-black hair and cheeks delicately fair, and teeth shown in sweet smiling and breasts firm rising and crowning sides of the softest and waist of the roundest. And in this second suit she was as a certain master of high conceits saith of the like of her. She came apparelled in an azure vest, ultramarine, as skies are decked and dight, I viewed unparalleled sight, which showed my eyes. A moon of summer on a winter night. Then they changed that suit for another and, veiling her face in the luxuriance of her hair, loosed her lovelocks, so dark, so long that their darkness and length outvied the darkest nights, and she shot through all hearts with the magical shaft of her eye-babes. They displayed her in the third dress and she was as said of her the sayer. Veiling her cheeks with hair a morn she comes, and I her mischiefs with the cloud compare, saying, Thou veilest morn with night. Ah, no, quoth she, I shroud full moon with darkling air. Then they displayed her in the fourth bridal dress and she came forward shining like the rising sun and swaying to and fro with lovesome grace and supple ease like a gazelle fawn. And she clave all hearts with the arrows of her eyelashes, even as saith one who described a charmer like her. The sun of beauty she to sight appears, and, lovely coy, she mocks all loveliness, and when he fronts her favour and her smile. A morn, the son of day in clouds must dress. Then she came forth in the fifth dress, a very light of loveliness like a wand of waving willow or a gazelle of the thirsty wold. Those locks which stung like scorpions along her cheeks were bent, and her neck was bowed in blandishment, and her hips quivered as she went. As saith one of the poets describing her in verse, she comes like fullest moon on happy night. Taper of waist, with shape of magic might, she hath an eye whose glances quell mankind. And ruby on her cheeks reflects his light, enveils her hips the blackness of her hair. Beware of curls that bite with viper bite, her sides are silken soft, the while the heart. Mere rock behind that surface lurks from sight, from the fringed curtains of her eyne she shoots shafts which at farthest range on mark alight, when round her neck or waist I throw my arms. Her breasts repel me with their hardened height. Ah, how her beauty all excels! Ah, how that shape transcends the graceful waving bough. Then they adorned her with the sixth tourelette, a dress which was green. And now she shamed in her slender straightness the nut-brown spear, her radiant face dimmed the brightest beams of full moon, and she outdid the bending branches in gentle movement and flexile grace. Her loveliness exalted the beauties of earth's four quarters, and she broke men's hearts by the significance of her semblance, for she was even as saith one of the poets in these lines. A damsel 'twas the tirer's art had decked with snares and sleight, and robed in rays as though the sun from her had borrowed light. She came before us wondrous clad in chemisette of green, as veiled by its leafy screen pomegranate hides from sight. And when he said, how cayest thou the manner of thy dress? She answered us in pleasant way with double meaning dight, we call this garment creve-coeur, and rightly is it height. For many a heart wi this we broke and conquered many a sprite. Then they displayed her in the seventh dress, coloured between safflower and saffron, even as one of the poets saith, in vest of saffron pale and safflower red. Musked, sandaled ambergrist, she came to front. Rise, cried her youth, go forth and show thyself. Sit, said her hips, we cannot bear the brunt. And when I craved about, her beauty said, do, and said her pretty shame, don't. Thus they displayed the bride in all her 7 toilettes before Hassan al-Basri, wholly neglecting the gobo who sat moping alone, and, when she opened her eyes she said, O Allah, make this man my goodman and deliver me from the evil of this hunchbacked groom. As soon as they had made an end of this part of the ceremony they dismissed the wedding guests who went forth, women, children and all, and none remained save Hassan and the hunchback, whilst the tirewomen led the bride into an inner room to change her garb and gear and get her ready for the bridegroom. Thereupon Quasimodo came up to Bad al-Din Hassan and said, O my lord, thou hast cheered us this night with thy good company and overwhelmed us with thy kindness and courtesy, but now why not get thee up and go? Bismillah, he answered, in Allah's name so be it, and rising, he went forth by the door, where the Ifrit met him and said, Stay in thy stead, O Bad al-Din, and when the hunchback goes out to the closet of ease go in without losing time and seat thyself in the alcove, and when the bride comes say to her, Tease I am thy husband, for the king devised this trick only fearing for thee the evil eye, and he whom thou sawest is but a syce, a groom, one of our stablemen. Then walk boldly up to her and unveil her face, for jealousy hath taken us of this matter. While Hassan was still talking with the Ifrit, behold, the groom fared forth from the hall and entering the closet of ease sat down on the stool. Hardly had he done this when the Ifrit came out of the tank, wherein the water was, in semblance of a mouse, and squeaked out, Zeke. Quoth the hunchback, What ails thee? And the mouse grew and grew till it became a coal-black cat and caterwauled meow, meow. Then it grew still more and more till it became a dog and barked out, Ow, ow. When the bridegroom saw this he was frightened and exclaimed out with thee, O unlucky one. But the dog grew and swelled till it became an ass-colt that brayed and snorted in his face, Hawk, hawk. Whereupon the hunchback quaked and cried, Come to my aid, O people of the house. But behold, the ass-colt grew and became big as a buffalo and walled the way before him and spake with the voice of the sons of Adam, saying, Woe to thee, O thou bunchback, thou stinkard, O thou filthiest of grooms. Hearing this the groom was seized with a colic and he sat down on the jakes in his clothes with teeth chattering and knocking together. Quoth the Ifrit, Is the world so straight to thee thou findest none to marry save my lady love? But as he was silent the Ifrit continued, Answer me or I will do thee dwell in the dust. By Allah, replied the Gobo, O king of the buffaloes, this is no fault of mine, for they forced me to wed her, and verily I wot not that she had a lover amongst the buffaloes, but now I repent, first before Allah and then before thee. Said the Ifrit to him, I swear to thee that if thou fare forth from this place, or thou utter a word before sunrise, I assuredly will wring thy neck. When the sun rises wend thy went and never more return to this house. So saying, the Ifrit took up the Gobo bridegroom and set him head downwards and feet upwards in the slit of the privy, and said to him, I will leave thee here but I shall be on the lookout for thee till sunrise, and, if thou stir before then, I will seize thee by the feet and dash out thy brains against the wall, so look out for thy life. Thus far concerning the hunchback, but as regards Bad al-Din Hassan of Bassorah he left the Gobo and the Ifrit jangling and wrangling and, going into the house, sat him down in the very middle of the alcove, and behold, in came the bride attended by an old woman who stood at the door and said, O father of uprightness, arise and take what God giveth thee. Then the old woman went away and the bride, Sit al-Huzn or the Lady of Beauty Height, entered the inner part of the alcove broken-hearted and saying in herself, By Allah I will never yield my person to him, no, not even were he to take my life. But as she came to the further end she saw Bad al-Din Hassan and she said, Dearling, art thou still sitting here? By Allah I was wishing that thou wert my bridegroom or, at least, that thou and the hunchbacked horsegroom were partners in me. He replied, O beautiful lady, how should the Sais have access to thee, and how should he share in thee with me? Then, quoth she, Who is my husband, thou or he? Sit al-Huzn, rejoined Hassan, we have not done this for mere fun, but only as a device to ward off the evil eye from thee, for when the tirewomen and singers and wedding guests saw thy beauty being displayed to me, they feared fascination and thy father hired the horsegroom for 10 dinars and a porringer of meat to take the evil eye off us, and now he hath received his hire and gone his gate. When the Lady of Beauty heard these words she smiled and rejoiced and laughed a pleasant laugh. Then she whispered him, By the Lord thou hast quenched a fire which tortured me and now, by Allah, O my little dark-haired darling, take me to thee and press me to thy bosom. Then she began singing, By Allah, set thy foot upon my soul. Since long, long years for this alone I long, and whisper tale of love in ear of me. To me 'tis sweeter than the sweetest song, no other youth upon my heart shall lie. So do it often, dear, and do it long. Then she stripped off her outer gear and she threw open her chemise from the neck downwards and showed her parts genital and all the rondure of her hips. When Bad al-Din saw the glorious sight his desires were roused, and he arose and doffed his clothes, and wrapping up in his bag trousers the purse of gold which he had taken from the Jew and which contained the 1,000 dinars, he laid it under the edge of the bedding. Then he took off his turband and set it upon the settle atop of his other clothes, remaining in his skullcap and fine shirt of blue silk laced with gold. Whereupon the Lady of Beauty drew him to her and he did likewise. Then he took her to his embrace and set her legs round his waist and point-blanked that cannon placed where it battereth down the bulwark of Maidenhead and layeth it waste. And he found her a pearl unpierced and unthridden and a filly by all men save himself unridden, and he abated her virginity and had joyance of her youth in his virility and presently he withdrew sword from sheath, and then returned to the fray right eth, and when the battle and the siege had finished, some 15 assaults he had furnished and she conceived by him that very night. Then he laid his hand under her head and she did the same and they embraced and fell asleep in each other's arms, as a certain poet said of such lovers in these couplets. Visit thy lover, spurn what envy told. No envious churl shall smile on love ensouled. Merciful Allah made no fairer sight than coupled lovers single couch doth hold, breast pressing breast and robed in joys their own, with pillowed forearms cast in finest mould, and when heart speaks to heart with tongue of love. Folk who would part them hammer steel ice cold, if a fair friend thou find who cleaves to thee. Live for that friend in heart enfold. O ye who blame for love us lover kind, say, can ye minister to diseased mind? This much concerning Bad al-Hassan and Sit al-Huzn his cousin, but as regards the Ifrit, as soon as he saw the twain asleep, he said to the Ifrita, Arise, slip thee under the youth and let us carry him back to his place ere dawn overtake us, for the day is near hand. Thereupon she came forward and, getting under him as he lay asleep, took him up clad only in his fine blue shirt, leaving the rest of his garments, and ceased not flying, and the Ifrit vying with her in flight, till the dawn advised them that it had come upon them midway, and the muezzin began his call from the minaret, Haste ye to salvation, haste ye to salvation. Then Allah suffered his angelic host to shoot down the Ifrit with a shooting star, so he was consumed, but the Ifrita escaped and she descended with Bad al-Din at the place where the Ifrit was burnt, and did not carry him back to Basora, fearing lest he come to harm. Now by the order of him who predestineth all things, they alighted at Damascus of Syria, and the Ifrita set down her burden at one of the city gates and flew away. When day arose and the doors were opened, the folks who came forth saw a handsome youth, with no other raiment but his blue shirt of gold-embroidered silk and skullcap, lying upon the ground drowned in sleep after the hard labor of the night which had not suffered him to take his rest. So the folk looking at him said, O her luck with whom this one spent the night! But would he had waited to don his garments. Quoth another, A sorry lot are the sons of great families. Haply he but now came forth of the tavern on some occasion of his own, and his wine flew to his head, whereby he hath missed the place he was making for and strayed till he came to the gate of the city, and finding it shut lay him down and went to bye-bye. As the people were bandying guesses about him, suddenly the morning breeze blew upon Bad al-Din, and raising his shirt to his middle showed a stomach and navel with something below it, and legs and thighs clear as crystal and smooth as cream. Cried the people, By Allah he is a pretty fellow, and at the cry Bad al-Din awoke and found himself lying at a city gate with a crowd gathered around him. At this he greatly marveled and asked, Where am I, O good folk, and what causeth you thus to gather round me, and what have I had to do with you? And they answered, We found thee lying here asleep during the call to dawn prayer, and this is all we know of the matter, but where didst thou lie last night? By Allah, O good people, replied he, I lay last night in Cairo. Said somebody, Thou hast surely been eating hashish, and another, He is a fool, and a third, He is a citrui, and a fourth asked him, Art thou out of thy mind? Thou sleepest in Cairo, and thou wakest in the morning at the gate of Damascus city. Cried he, By Allah, my good people, one and all, I lie not to you. Indeed I lay yesternight in the land of Egypt, and yesternoon I was at Basora. Quoth one, Well, and quoth another, Ho, and a third, So, and a fourth cried, This youth is mad, is possessed of the jinni. So they clapped hands at him and said to one another, Alas, the pity of it for his youth, by Allah a madman, and madness is no respecter of persons. Then they said to him, Collect thy wits and return to thy reason. How couldst thou be in Basora yesterday and Cairo yesternight, and withal awake in Damascus this morning? But he persisted, Indeed I was a bridegroom in Cairo last night. Belike thou hast been dreaming, rejoined they, and sawest all this in thy sleep. So Hassan took thought for a while and said to them, By Allah, this is no dream, nor vision-like doth it seem. I certainly was in Cairo where they displayed the bride before me, in presence of a third person, the hunchback groom who was sitting hard by. By Allah, O my brother, this be no dream, and if it were a dream, where is the bag of gold I bore with me, and where are my turband and my robe, and my trousers? Then he rose and entered the city, threading its highways and byways and bazaar streets, and the people pressed upon him and jeered at him, crying out Madman, Madman, till he, beside himself with rage, took refuge in a cook's shop. Now that cook had been a trifle too clever, that is, a rogue and thief, but Allah had made him repent and turn from his evil ways and open a cookshop, and all the people of Damascus stood in fear of his boldness and his mischief. So when the crowd saw the youth enter his shop, they dispersed being afraid of him, and went their ways. The cook looked at Bad al-Din and, noting his beauty and loveliness, fell in love with him forthright and said, Whence comest thou, O youth? Tell me at once thy tale, for thou art become dearer to me than my soul. So Hassan recounted to him all that had befallen him from beginning to end, but in repetition there is no fruition, and the cook said, O my lord Bad al-Din, Doubtless thou knowest that this case is wondrous and this story marvellous. Therefore, O my son, hide what hath betided thee, till Allah dispel what ills be thine, and tarry with me here the meanwhile, for I have no child and I will adopt thee. Bad al-Din replied, Be it as thou wilt, O my uncle. Whereupon the cook went to the bazaar and bought him a fine suit of clothes and made him don it, then fared with him to the Qazi, and formally declared that he was his son. So Bad al-Din Hassan became known in Damascus city as the cook's son, and he sat with him in the shop to take the silver, and on this wise he sojourned there for a time. Thus far concerning him, but as regards his cousin, the Lady of Beauty, when morning dawned she awoke and missed Bad al-Din Hassan from her side, but she thought that he had gone to the privy and she sat expecting him for an hour or so, when behold, entered her father Shams al-Din Mohammed, Wazir of Egypt. Now he was disconsolate by reason of what had befallen him through the Sultan, who had entreated him harshly and had married his daughter by force to the lowest of his menials, and he too a lump of a groom bunchbacked withal, and he said to himself, I will slay this daughter of mine if of her own free will she have yielded her person to this accursed carle. So he came to the door of the bride's private chamber and said, Ho, Sit al-Huzn. She answered him, Here am I, O my lord, and came out unsteady of gait after the pains and pleasures of the night, and she kissed his hand, her face showing redoubled brightness and beauty for having lain in the arms of that gazelle, her cousin. When her father, the Wazir, saw her in such case, he asked her, O thou accursed, art thou rejoicing because of this horsegroom? And Sit al-Huzn smiled sweetly and answered, By Allah, don't ridicule me. Enough of what passed yesterday when folk laughed at me, and evened me with that groom fellow who is not worthy to bring my husband's shoes or slippers, nay who is not worth the paring of my husband's nails. By the Lord, never in my life have I night a night so sweet as yesternight, so don't mock by reminding me of the gobo. When her parent heard her words he was filled with fury, and his eyes glared and stared, so that little of them showed save the whites, and he cried, Fie upon thee! What words are these? 'Twas the hunchbacked horsegroom who passed the night with thee. Allah upon thee, replied the Lady of Beauty, do not worry me about the gobo, Allah damn his father, and leave jesting with me, for this groom was only hired for 10 dinars and a porringer of meat, and he took his wage and went his way. As for me, I entered the bridal chamber, where I found my true bridegroom sitting, after the singer women had displayed me to him, the same who had crossed their hands with red gold, till every pauper that was present waxed wealthy, and I passed the night on the breast of my bonny man, a most lively darling, with his black eyes and joined eyebrows. When her parent heard these words the light before his face became night, and he cried out at her saying, O thou whore! What is this thou tellest me? Where be thy wits? O my father, she rejoined, thou breakest my heart. Enough for thee that thou hast been so hard upon me. Indeed my husband who took my virginity is but just now gone to the draught house, and I feel that I have conceived by him. The Wazir rose in much marvel and entered the privy, where he found the hunchbacked groom with his head in the hole, and his heels in the air. At this sight he was confounded and said, This is none other than he, the rascal hunchback. So he called to him, Ho hunchback. The gobo grunted out, Taghum, Taghum, thinking it was the Ifrit spoke to him. So the Wazir shouted at him and said, Speak out, or I'll strike off thy pate with this sword. Then quoth the hunchback, By Allah, O Sheikh of the Ifrits, ever since thou settest me in this place, I have not lifted my head, so Allah upon thee, take pity and entreat me kindly. When the Wazir heard this he asked, What is this thou sayest? I'm the bride's father and no Ifrit. Enough for thee that thou hast well nigh done me die, answered Quasimodo. Now go thy ways before he come upon thee who hath served me thus. Could ye not marry me to any save the ladylove of buffaloes and the beloved of Ifrits? Allah curse her and curse him who married me to her and was the cause of this my case. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of day, and ceased to say her permitted say. When it was the 23rd night, said she, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the hunchbacked groom spake to the bride's father saying, Allah curse him who was the cause of this my case. Then said the Wazir to him, Up and out of this place. Am I mad, cried the groom, that I should go with thee without leave of the Ifrit whose last words to me were, When the sun rises, arise and go thy gate. So hath the sun risen or no, for I dare not budge from this place till then. Ask the Wazir, who brought thee hither? And he answered, I came here yesternight for a call of nature and to do what none can do for me, when lo, a mouse came out of the water, and squeaked at me and swelled and waxed gross till it was big as a buffalo, and spoke to me words that entered my ears. Then he left me here and went away. Allah curse the bride and him who married me to her. The Wazir walked up to him and lifted his head out of the cesspool hole, and he fared forth running for dear life and hardly crediting that the sun had risen, and repaired to the Sultan, to whom he told all that had befallen him with the Ifrit. But the Wazir returned to the bride's private chamber, sore troubled in spirit about her, and said to her, O my daughter, explain this strange matter to me. Quoth she, 'Tis simply this. The bridegroom to whom they displayed me yestereve lay with me all night, and took my virginity, and I am with child by him. He is my husband, and if thou believe me not, there are his turband, twisted as it was, lying on the settle, and his dagger and his trousers beneath the bed with a something, I wot not what, wrapped up in them. When her father heard this, he entered the private chamber and found the turband which had been left there by Badr al-Din Hassan, his brother's son, and he took it in hand and turned it over, saying, This is the turband worn by Wazirs, save that it is of Mosul stuff. So he opened it and, finding what seemed to be an amulet sewn up in the fez, he unsewed the lining and took it out. Then he lifted up the trousers wherein was the purse of the 1,000 gold pieces and, opening that also, found in it a written paper. This he read, and it was the sale receipt of the Jew in the name of Badr al-Din Hassan, son of Nur al-Din Ali, the Egyptian, and the 1,000 dinars were also there. No sooner had Shams al-Din read this than he cried out with a loud cry and fell to the ground fainting. And as soon as he revived and understood the gist of the matter, he marveled and said, There is no God, but the God, whose all might is over all things. Knowest thou, O my daughter, who it was that became the husband of thy virginity? No, answered she, and he said, Verily he is the son of my brother, thy cousin, and this 1,000 dinars is thy dowry. Praise be to Allah. And would I wot how this matter came about? Then opened he the amulet which was sewn up and found therein a paper in the handwriting of his deceased brother, Nur al-Din the Egyptian, father of Badr al-Din Hassan, and, when he saw the handwriting, he kissed it again and again, and he wept and wailed over his dead brother and improvised this lines. I see their traces and with pain I melt, and on their whilome homes I weep and yearn, and him I pray who dealt this parting blow. Some day he deign vouchsafe a safe return. When he ceased versifying, he read the scroll and found in it recorded the dates of his brother's marriage with the daughter of the Wazir of Basora, and of his going in to her, and her conception, and the birth of Badr al-Din Hassan, and all his brother's history and doings up to his dying day. So he marveled much and shook with joy and, comparing the dates with his own marriage and going in to his wife and the birth of their daughter, Sit al-Huzn, he found that they perfectly agreed. So he took the document and, repairing with it to the Sultan, acquainted him with what had passed, from first to last, whereat the king marveled and commanded the case to be at once recorded. The Wazir abode that day expecting to see his brother's son, but he came not, and he waited a second day, a third day, and so on to the 7th day, without any tidings of him. So he said, By Allah, I will do a deed such as none hath ever done before me, and he took reed pen and ink and drew upon a sheet of paper the plan of the whole house, showing whereabouts was the private chamber with the curtain in such a place and the furniture in such another, and so on with all that was in the room. Then he folded up the sketch and, causing all the furniture to be collected, he took Badr al-Din's garments and the turband and fez and robe and purse, and carried the whole to his house and locked them up, against the coming of his nephew, Badr al-Din Hassan, the son of his lost brother, with an iron padlock on which he set his seal. As for the Wazir's daughter, when her tale of months was fulfilled, she bare a son like the full moon, the image of his father in beauty and loveliness and fair proportions and perfect grace. They cut his navel string and kohled his eyelids to strengthen his eyes, and gave him over to the nurses and nursery governesses, naming him Ajib, the Wonderful. His day was as a month and his month was as a year, and, when 7 years had passed over him, his grandfather sent him to school, enjoining the master to teach him Quran reading, and to educate him well. He remained at the school 4 years, till he began to bully his schoolfellows and abuse them and bash them and thrash them and say, Who among you is like me? I am the son of Wazer of Egypt. At last the boys came in a body to complain to the monitor of what hard usage they were wont to have from Ajib, and he said to them, I will tell you somewhat you may do to him so that he shall leave off coming to the school, and it is this. When he enters tomorrow, sit ye down about him and say some one of you to some other, By Allah none shall play with us at this game except he tell us the names of his mamma and his papa, for he who knows not the names of his mother and his father is a bastard, a son of adultery, and he shall not play with us. When morning dawned the boys came to school, Ajib being one of them, and all flocked around him saying, We will play a game wherein none can join save he can tell the name of his mamma and his papa. And they all cried, By Allah, good. Then quoth one of them, My name is Majid and my mammy's name is Alawiya and my daddy's is Al-Din. Another spoke in like guise and yet a third, till Ajid's turn came, and he said, My name is Ajib, and my mother's is Sit al-Huzn, and my father's Shams al-Din, the Wazer of Cairo. By Allah, cried they, the Wazer is not thy true father. Ajib answered, The Wazer is my father in very deed. Then the boys all laughed and clapped their hands at him, saying he does not know who is his papa. Get out from among us, for none shall play with us except he know his father's name. Thereupon they dispersed from around him and laughed him to scorn, so his breast was straitened and he well nigh choked with tears and hurt feelings. Then said the monitor to him, We know that the Wazer is thy grandfather, the father of thy mother, Sit al-Huzn, and not thy father. As for thy father, neither dost thou know him nor yet do we, for the Sultan married thy mother to the hunchbacked horsegroom, but the Jinnee came and slept with her and thou hast no known father. Leave, then, comparing thyself too advantageously with the little ones of the school, till thou know that thou hast a lawful father, for until then thou wilt pass for a child of adultery amongst them. Sayest thou not that even a huckster's son knoweth his own sire? Thy grandfather is the Wazer of Egypt, but as for thy father we wot him not and we say indeed that thou hast none. So return to thy sound senses. When Ajib heard these insulting words from the monitor and the schoolboys and understood the reproach they put upon him, he went out at once and ran to his mother, Sit al-Huzn, to complain, but he was crying so bitterly that his tears prevented his speech for a while. When she heard his sobs and saw his tears her heart burned as though with fire for him, and she said, O my son, why dost thou weep? Allah keep the tears from thine eyes. Tell me what hath betided thee. So he told her all that he heard from the boys and from the monitor and ended with asking, And who, O my mother, is my father? She answered, Thy father is the Wazer of Egypt. But he said, Do not lie to me. The Wazer is thy father, not mine. Who then is my father? Except thou tell me the very truth I will kill myself with this hanger. When his mother heard him speak of his father she wept, remembering her cousin and her bridal night with him and all that occurred there and then, and she repeated these couplets. Love in my heart they lit and went their ways. And all I loved to furthest lands withdrew, and when they left me sufferance also left. And when we parted patience bade adieu, they fled and flying with my joys they fled. In very constancy my spirit flew, they made my eyelids flow with severance tears. And to the parting pang these drops are due, and when I long to see reunion day, my groans prolonging sore for ruth I sue, then in my heart of hearts their shapes I trace. And love and longing care and cark renew, O ye, whose names cling round me like a cloak, whose love yet closer than a shirt I drew, beloved ones, how long this hard despite? How long this severance and this coy shy flight? Then she wailed and shrieked aloud and her son did the like. And behold, in came the Wazer whose heart burnt within him at the sight of their lamentations, and he said, What makes you weep? So the Lady of Beauty acquainted him with what had happened between her son and the schoolboys, and he also wept, calling to mind his brother and what had passed between them and what had betided his daughter and how he had failed to find out what mystery there was in the matter. Then he rose at once and, repairing to the audience hall, went straight to the king and told his tale and craved his permission to travel eastward to the city of Bassorah and ask after his brother's son. Furthermore, he besought the Sultan to write for him letters patent, authorizing him to seize upon Bad al-Din, his nephew and son-in-law, wheresoever he might find him. And he wept before the king, who had pity on him and wrote royal autographs to his deputies in all climes and countries and cities, whereat the Wazir rejoiced and prayed for blessings on him. Then, taking leave of his sovereign, he returned to his house, where he equipped himself and his daughter and his adopted child Ajib, with all things meet for a long march, and set out and travelled the first day and the second and the third and so forth till he arrived at Damascus city. He found it a fair place abounding in trees and streams, even as the poet said of it. When I nighted and dayed in Damascus town, time sware such another he ne'er should view, and careless we slept under wing of night, till dappled morn gan her smiles renew, and dewdrops on branch in their beauty hung, like pearls to be dropped when the zephyr blew, and the lake was the page where birds read and note, and the clouds set points to what breezes wrote. The Wazir encamped on the open space called Al-Hassa, and, after pitching tents, said to his servants, "A halt here for 2 days." So they went into the city upon their several occasions, this to sell and that to buy, this to go to the hammam and that to visit the cathedral mosque of the Banu Umayyah, the Umayyads, whose like is not in this world. Ajib also went, with his attendant eunuch, for solace and diversion to the city, and the servant followed with a quarterstaff of almond wood so heavy that if he struck a camel therewith the beast would never rise again. When the people of Damascus saw Ajib's beauty and brilliancy and perfect grace and symmetry, for he was a marvel of comeliness and winning loveliness, softer than the cool breeze of the north, sweeter than limpid waters to a man in drouth, and pleasanter than the health for which sick man sueth, a mighty many followed him, whilst others ran on before, and sat down on the road until he should come up, that they might gaze on him, till, as destiny had decreed, the eunuch stopped opposite the shop of Ajib's father, Bad al-Din Hassan. Now his beard had grown long and thick and his wits had ripened during the 12 years which had passed over him, and the cook and ex-rogue having died, the so-called Hassan of Bassorah had succeeded to his goods and shop, for that he had been formally adopted before the Qazi and witnesses. When his son and the eunuch stepped before him he gazed on Ajib and, seeing how very beautiful he was, his heart fluttered and throbbed, and blood drew to blood and natural affection spake out and his bowels yearned over him. He had just dressed a conserve of pomegranate grains with sugar, and heaven-implanted love wrought within him. So he called to his son Ajib and said, "O my lord, O thou who hast gotten the mastery of my heart and my very vitals and to whom my bowels yearn, say me, wilt thou enter my house and solace my soul by eating of my meat?" Then his eyes streamed with tears which he could not stay, for he bethought him of what he had been and what he had become. When Ajib heard his father's words his heart also yearned himwards, and he looked at the eunuch and said to him, "Of a truth, O my good guard, my heart yearns to this cook, he is as one that hath a son far away from him, so let us enter and gladden his heart by tasting of his hospitality. Perchance for our so doing Allah may reunite me with my father." When the eunuch heard these words he cried, "A fine thing this, by Allah! Shall the sons of Wazirs be seen eating in a common cookshop? Indeed I keep off the folk from thee with this quarterstaff lest they even look upon thee, and I dare not suffer thee to enter this shop at all." When Hassan of Bassorah heard his speech he marveled and turned to the eunuch with the tears pouring down his cheeks, and Ajib said, "Verily my heart loves him," but he answered, "Leave this talk, thou shalt not go in." Thereupon the father turned to the eunuch and said, "O worthy sir, why wilt thou not gladden my soul by entering my shop? O thou who art like a chestnut, dark without but white of heart within, O thou of the like of whom a certain poet said *******. The eunuch burst out laughing and asked, said what? Speak out by Allah and be quick about it. So Hassan the Bassorite began reciting these couplets. If not master of manners or aught but discreet, in the household of kings no trust could he take, and then for the harem, what eunuch is he, whom angels would serve for his service sake? The eunuch marveled and was pleased at these words, so he took Ajib by the hand and went into the cook's shop, whereupon Hassan the Bassorite ladled into a saucer some conserve of pomegranate grains wonderfully good, dressed with almonds and sugar, saying, "You have honored me with your company. Eat then, and health and happiness to you." Thereupon Ajib said to his father, "Sit thee down and eat with us, so perchance Allah may unite us with him we long for." Quoth Hassan, "O my son, hast thou then been afflicted in thy tender years with parting from those thou lovest?" Quoth Ajib, even so, O nuncle mine, my heart burns for the loss of a beloved one who is none other than my father, and indeed I come forth, I and my grandfather, to circle and search the world for him. Oh, the pity of it, and how I long to meet him. Then he wept with exceeding weeping, and his father also wept seeing him weep and for his own bereavement, which recalled to him his long separation from dear friends and from his mother, and the eunuch was moved to pity for him. Then they ate together till they were satisfied, and Ajib and the slave rose and left the shop. Hereat Hassan the Bassorite felt as though his soul had departed his body and had gone with them, for he could not lose sight of the boy during the twinkling of an eye, albeit he knew not that Ajib was his son. So he locked up his shop and hastened after them, and he walked so fast that he came up with them before they had gone out of the western gate. The eunuch turned and asked him, What ails thee? And Bad Uldin answered, When you went from me, meseemed my soul had gone with you, and, as I had business without the city gate, I purposed to bear you company till my matter was ordered and so return. The eunuch was angered and said to Ajib, This is just what I feared. We ate that unlucky mouthful, which we are bound to respect, and here is the fellow following us from place to place, for the vulgar are ever the vulgar. Ajib, turning and seeing the cook just behind him, was wroth and his face reddened with rage, and he said to the servant, Let him walk the highway of the Moslems, but, when we turn off it to our tents, and find that he still follows us, we will send him about his business with a flea in his ear. Then he bowed his head and walked on, the eunuch walking behind him. But Hassan of Bassorah followed them to the plain Al-Hassa, and, as they drew near to the tents, they turned round and saw him close on their heels, so Ajib was very angry, fearing that the eunuch might tell his grandfather what had happened. His indignation was the hotter for apprehension lest any say that after he had entered a cookshop the cook had followed him. So he turned and looked at Hassan of Bassorah and found his eyes fixed on his own, for the father had become a body without a soul, and it seemed to Ajib that his eye was a treacherous eye or that he was some lewd fellow. So his rage redoubled and, stooping down, he took up a stone weighing 1/2 pound and threw it at his father. It struck him on the forehead, cutting it open from eyebrow to eyebrow and causing the blood to stream down, and Hassan fell to the ground in a swoon whilst Ajib and the eunuch made for the tents. When the father came to himself he wiped away the blood and tore off a strip from his turban and bound up his head, blaming himself the while, and saying, I wronged the lad by shutting up my shop and following, so that he thought I was some evil-minded fellow. Then he returned to his place where he busied himself with the sale of his sweetmeats, and he yearned after his mother at Bassorah, and wept over her and broke out repeating, Unjust it were to bid the world be just. And blame her not, she ne'er was made for justice. Take what she gives thee, leave all grief aside. For now to fair and then to foul her lust is. So Hassan of Bassorah set himself steadily to sell his sweetmeats, but the Wazir, his uncle, halted in Damascus 3 days and then marched upon Emesa, and passing through that town he made inquiry there and at every place where he rested. Thence he fared on by way of Hama and Aleppo and thence through Diyarbakir and Meridim and Mosul, still inquiring, till he arrived at Bassorah city. Here, as soon as he had secured a lodging, he presented himself before the Sultan, who entreated him with high honor and the respect due to his rank, and asked the cause of his coming. The Wazir acquainted him with his history and told him that the minister Nur al-Din was his brother, whereupon the Sultan exclaimed, Allah have mercy upon him, and added, My good Sahib, he was my Wazir for 15 years and I loved him exceedingly. Then he died leaving a son who abode only a single month after his father's death, since which time he has disappeared and we could gain no tidings of him. But his mother, who is the daughter of my former minister, is still among us. When the Wazir Shams al-Din heard that his nephew's mother was alive and well, he rejoiced and said, O king, I much desire to meet her. The king on the instant gave him leave to visit her, so he betook himself to the mansion of his brother, Nur al-Din, and cast sorrowful glances on all things in and around it and kissed the threshold. Then he bethought him of his brother, Nur al-Din Ali, and how he had died in a strange land far from kith and kin and friends, and he wept and repeated these lines. I wander mid these walls, my Layla's walls. And kissing this and other wall I roam, 'tis not the walls or roof my heart so loves. but those who in this house had made their home. Then he passed through the gate into a courtyard and found a vaulted doorway builded of hardest syenite inlaid with sundry kinds of multicolored marble. Into this he walked and wandered about the house and, throwing many a glance around, saw the name of his brother, Nur-al-Din, written in gold wash upon the walls. So he went up to the inscription and kissed it and wept and thought of how he had been separated from his brother and had now lost him forever, and he recited these couplets. I ask of you from every rising sun, and eke I ask when flasheth leven light, restless I pass my nights in passion pain. Yet ne'er I plain me of my painful plight, my love, if longer last this parting throe. Little by little shall it waste my sprite, and thou wouldst bless these eyne with sight of thee. One day on earth, I crave none other sight, think not another could possess my mind. Nor length nor breadth for other love I find. Then he walked on till he came to the apartment of his brother's widow, the mother of Bad al-Din Hassan, the Egyptian. Now from the time of her son's disappearance she had never ceased weeping and wailing through the light hours and the dark, and, when the years grew longsome with her, she built for him a tomb of marble in the midst of the saloon and there used to weep for him day and night, never sleeping save thereby. When the Wazir drew near her apartment, he heard her voice and stood behind the door while she addressed the sepulchre in verse and said, Answer, by Allah, sepulchre, are all his beauties gone? Hath changed the power to blight his charms, that beauty's paragon? Thou art not earth, O sepulchre, nor art thou sky to me. How comes it, then, in thee I see conjoint the branch and moon? While she was bemoaning herself after this fashion, behold, the Wazir went in to her and saluted her and informed her that he was her husband's brother, and, telling her all that had passed between them, laid open before her the whole story, how her son Bad al-Din Hassan had spent a whole night with his daughter full 10 years ago but had disappeared in the morning. And he ended with saying, My daughter conceived by thy son and bare a male child who is now with me, and he is thy son and thy son's son by my daughter. When she heard the tidings that her boy, Bad al-Din, was still alive and saw her brother-in-law, she rose up to him and threw herself at his feet and kissed them, reciting these lines. Allah be good to him that gives glad tidings of thy steps. In very sooth for better news mine ears would never sue, were he content with worn-out robe, upon his back I'd throw. A heart to pieces rent and torn when heard the word adieu. Then the Wazir sent for a jib and his grandmother stood up and fell on his neck and wept, but Shams al-Din said to her, This is no time for weeping, this is the time to get thee ready for travelling with us to the land of Egypt, haply Allah will reunite me and thee with thy son and my nephew. Replied she, hearkening and obedience, and, rising at once, collected her baggage and treasures and her jewels, and equipped herself and her slave girls for the march, whilst the Wazir went to take his leave of the Sultan of Bassorah, who sent by him presents and rarities for the Sultan of Egypt. Then he set out at once upon his homeward march and journeyed till he came to Damascus city, where he alighted in the usual place and pitched tents, and said to his suite, We will halt a night here to buy presents and rare things for the Sultan. Now Ajib bethought him of the past, so he said to the eunuch, O lake, I want a little diversion. Come, let us go down to the great bazaar of Damascus, and see what hath become of the cook whose sweetmeats we ate and whose head we broke, for indeed he was kind to us and we entreated him scurvily. The eunuch answered, Hearing is obeying. So they went forth from the tents, and the tie of blood drew Ajib towards his father, and forthwith they passed through the gateway, Bab al-Faradi's height, and entered the city and ceased not walking through the streets till they reached the cookshop, where they found Hassan of Bassorah standing at the door. It was near the time of mid-afternoon prayer, and it so fortuned that he had just dressed a confection of pomegranate grains. When the twain drew near to him and Ajib saw him, his heart yearned towards him, and noticing the scar of the blow, which time had darkened on his brow, he said to him, Peace be on thee, O man, know that my heart is with thee. But when Bad al-Din looked upon his son, his vitals yearned and his heart fluttered, and he hung his head earthwards and sought to make his tongue give utterance to his words, but he could not. Then he raised his head humbly and suppliant-wise towards his boy and repeated these couplets. I longed for my beloved, but when I saw his face, abashed I held my tongue and stood with downcast eye, and hung my head in dread and would have hid my love. But do whatso I would hidden it would not lie, Volumes of plaints I had prepared, reproach and blame. But when we met, no single word remembered I. And then said he to them, Heal my broken heart and eat of my sweetmeats, for, by Allah, I cannot look at thee but my heart flutters. Indeed I should not have followed thee the other day, but that I was beside myself. By Allah, answered Ajib, thou dost indeed love us. We ate in thy house a mouthful when we were here before, and thou madest us repent of it, for that thou followedst us and wouldst have disgraced us. So now we will not eat aught with thee save on condition that thou make oath not to go out after us nor dog us. Otherwise we will not visit thee again during our present stay, for we shall halt a week here, whilst my grandfather buys certain presents for the king. Quoth Hassan of Bassorah, I promise you this. So Ajib and the eunuch entered the shop, and his father set before them a saucerful of conserve of pomegranate grains. Said Ajib, Sit thee down and eat with us, so haply shall Allah dispel our sorrows. Hassan the Bassorite was joyful and sat down and ate with them, but his eyes kept gazing fixedly on Ajib's face, for his very heart and vitals clove to him, and at last the boy said to him, Did I not tell thee thou art a most noyous dotard, so do stint thy staring in my face. But when Hassan of Bassorah heard his son's words he repeated these lines. Thou'st some art the hearts of men to clip. Close-veiled, far-hidden mystery dark and deep, O thou whose beauties shame the lustrous moon, wherewith the saffron morn fears rivalship, thy beauty is a shrine shall ne'er decay, whose signs shall grow until they all outstrip. Must I be thirst-burnt by that Eden brow, and die of pine to taste that corsalip? Hassan kept putting morsels into Ajib's mouth at one time and at another time did the same by the eunuch, and they ate till they were satisfied and could no more. Then all rose up and the cook poured water on their hands, and, loosing a silken waist shawl, dried them and sprinkled them with rosewater from a casting bottle he had by him. Then he went out and presently returned with a gugglet of sherbet flavoured with rosewater, scented with musk and cooled with snow, and he set this before them saying, Complete your kindness to me. So Ajib took the gugglet and drank and passed it to the eunuch, and it went round till their stomachs were full and they were surfeited with a meal larger than their wont. Then they went away and made haste in walking till they reached the tents, and Ajib went in to his grandmother, who kissed him and, thinking of her son, Bad al-Din Hassan, groaned aloud and wept and recited these lines. I still had hoped to see thee and enjoy thy sight. For in thine absence life has lost its kindly light. I swear my vitals what none other love but thine. By Allah, who can read the secrets of the sprite. Then she asked Ajib, O my son, where hast thou been? And he answered, In Damascus city. Whereupon she rose and set before him a bit of scone and a saucer of conserve of pomegranate grains, which was too little sweetened, and she said to the eunuch, Sit down with thy master. Said the servant to himself, By Allah, we have no mind to eat, I cannot bear the smell of bread. But he sat down and so did Ajib, though his stomach was full of what he had eaten already and drunken. Nevertheless he took a bit of the bread and dipped it in the pomegranate conserve and made shift to eat it, but he found it too little sweetened, for he was cloyed and surfeited, so he said, What be this wild beast stuff? O my son, cried his grandmother, dost thou find fault with my cookery? I cooked this myself and none can cook it as nicely as I can save thy father, Bad al-Din Hassan. By Allah, O my lady, Ajib answered, This dish is nasty stuff, for we saw but now in the city of Bassorah a cook who so dresseth pomegranate grains that the very smell openeth a way to the heart and the taste would make a full man long to eat, and, as for this mess compared with his, 'tis not worth either much or little. When his grandmother heard his words she waxed wroth with exceeding wrath and looked at the servant, and Shahrazad perceived the dawn of day and ceased to say her permitted say. When it was the 24th night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when Ajib's grandmother heard his words, she waxed wroth and looked at the servant and said, Woe to thee! Dost thou spoil my son, and dost take him into common cookshops? The eunuch was frightened and denied, saying, We did not go into the shop, we only passed by it. By Allah, cried Ajib, but we did go in and we ate till it came out of our nostrils, and the dish was better than thy dish. Then his grandmother rose and went and told her brother-in-law, who was incensed against the eunuch, and sending for him asked him, Why didst thou take my son into a cookshop? And the eunuch being frightened answered, We did not go in. But Ajib said, "We did go inside and ate conserve of pomegranate grains till we were full, and the cook gave us to drink of iced and sugared sherbet." At this the Wazir's indignation redoubled and he questioned the castrato, but, as he still denied, the Wazir said to him, "If thou speak sooth, sit down and eat before us." So he came forward and tried to eat, but could not, and threw away the mouthful, crying, "O my lord, I am surfeited since yesterday." By this the Wazir was certified that he had eaten at the cook's and bade the slaves throw him, which they did. Then they came down on him with a rib basting which burned him till he cried for mercy and help from Allah, saying, "O my master, beat me no more and I will tell thee the truth." Whereupon the Wazir stopped the bastinado and said, "Now speak thou sooth." Quoth the eunuch, "Know then that we did enter the shop of a cook while he was dressing conserve of pomegranate grains, and he set some of it before us. By Allah, I never ate in my life its like, nor tasted aught nastier than this stuff which is now before us." Bad al-Din Hassan's mother was angry at this and said, "Needs thou must go back to the cook and bring me a saucer of conserved pomegranate grains from that which is in his shop, and show it to thy master, that he may say which be the better and the nicer, mine or his." Said the unsexed, "I will." So on the instant she gave him a saucer and a half dinar, and he returned to the shop and said to the cook, "O Sheikh of all cooks, we have laid a wager concerning thy cookery in my lord's house, for they have conserve of pomegranate grains there also, so give me this half dinar's worth and look to it, for I have eaten a full meal of stick on account of thy cookery, and so do not let me eat aught more thereof." Hassan of Basora laughed and answered, "By Allah, none can dress this dish as it should be dressed save myself and my mother, and she at this time is in a far country." Then he ladled out a saucer full, and, finishing it off with musk and rosewater, put it in a cloth which he sealed and gave it to the eunuch, who hastened back with it. No sooner had Bad al-Din Hassan's mother tasted it and perceived its fine flavor and the excellence of the cookery, than she knew who had dressed it, and she screamed and fell down fainting. The Wazir, sorely started, sprinkled rosewater upon her, and after a time she recovered and said, "If my son be yet of this world, none dressed this conserve of pomegranate grains but he, and this cook is my very son Bad al-Din Hassan. There is no doubt of it, nor can there be any mistake, for only I and he knew how to prepare it, and I taught him." When the Wazir heard her words, he joyed with exceeding joy and said, "O the longing of me for a sight of my brother's son! I wonder if the days will ever unite us with him. Yet it is to Almighty Allah alone that we look for bringing about this meeting." Then he rose without stay or delay and, going to his suite, said to them, "Be off, some 50 of you, with sticks and staves to the cook's shop and demolish it. Then pinion his arms behind him with his own turband, saying, 'It was thou madest that foul mess of pomegranate grain.' And drag him here perforce, but without doing him a harm." And they replied, "It is well." Then the Wazir rode off without losing an instant to the palace and, foregathering with the Viceroy of Damascus, showed him the Sultan's orders. After careful perusal he kissed the letter, and placing it upon his head said to his visitor, "Who is this offender of thine?" Quoth the Wazir, "A man who is a cook." So the Viceroy at once sent his apparitors to the shop, which they found demolished and everything in it broken to pieces, for whilst the Wazir was riding to the palace his men had done his bidding. Then they awaited his return from the audience, and Hassan of Basora, who was their prisoner, kept saying, "I wonder what they have found in the conserve of pomegranate grains to bring things to this pass." When the Wazir returned to them, after his visit to the Viceroy, who had given him formal permission to take up his debtor and depart with him, on entering the tents he called for the cook. They brought him forward pinioned with his turband, and, when Bad al-Din Hassan saw his uncle, he wept with excessive weeping and said, "O my lord, what is my offence against thee? Art thou the man who dressed that conserve of pomegranate grains?" asked the Wazir, and he answered, "Yes." "Didst thou find in it aught to call for the cutting off of my head?" Quoth the Wazir, "That were the least of thy deserts." Quoth the cook, "O my lord, wilt thou not tell me my crime and what aileth the conserve of pomegranate grains?" "Presently," replied the Wazir, and called aloud to his men, saying, "Bring hither the camels." So they struck the tents, and by the Wazir's orders the servants took Bad al-Din Hassan, and set him in a chest which they padlocked and put on a camel. Then they departed and stinted not journeying till nightfall, when they halted and ate some victual, and took Bad al-Din Hassan out of his chest and gave him a meal and locked him up again. They set out once more and travelled till they reached Kimra, where they took him out of the box and brought him before the Wazir, who asked him, "Art thou he who dressed that conserve of pomegranate grains?" He answered, "Yes, O my lord," and the Wazir said, "Fetter him." So they fettered him and returned him to the chest and fared on again till they reached Cairo and lighted at the quarter called Al-Radaniyah. Then the Wazir gave order to take Bad al-Din Hassan out of the chest and sent for a carpenter and said to him, "Make me a cross of wood for this fellow." Cried Bad al-Din Hassan, "And what wilt thou do with it?" And the Wazir replied, "I mean to crucify thee thereon, and nail thee thereto and parade thee all about the city. And why wilt thou use me after this fashion? Because of thy villainous cookery of conserved pomegranate grains. How durst thou dress it and sell it lacking pepper? And for that it lacked pepper wilt thou do all this to me? Is it not enough that thou hast broken my shop and smashed my gear and boxed me up in a chest and fed me only once a day? Too little pepper, too little pepper. This is a crime which can be expiated only upon the cross." Then Bad al-Din Hassan marvelled and fell a mourning for his life, whereupon the Wazir asked him, "Of what thinkest thou?" And he answered him, "Of maggoty heads like thine, for an thou had 1 ounce of sense thou hadst not treated me thus." Quoth the Wazir, "It is our duty to punish thee lest thou do the like again." Quoth Bad al-Din Hassan, "Of a truth my offence were over-punished by the least of what thou hast already done to me, and Allah damn all conserve of pomegranate grains and curse the hour when I cooked it, and would I had died ere this." But the Wazir rejoined, "There is no help for it. I must crucify a man who sells conserve of pomegranate grains lacking pepper." All this time the carpenter was shaping the wood and Bad al-Din looked on, and thus they did till night, when his uncle took him and clapped him into the chest, saying, "The thing shall be done tomorrow." Then he waited until he knew Bad al-Din Hassan to be asleep, when he mounted, and taking the chest up before him, entered the city and rode on to his own house, where he alighted and said to his daughter, "Sit al-Huzn, praised be Allah who hath reunited thee with thy husband, the son of thine uncle. Up now, and order the house as it was on thy bridal night." So the servants arose and lit the candles, and the Wazir took out his plan of the nuptial chamber, and directed them what to do till they had set everything in its stead, so that whoever saw it would have no doubt but it was the very night of the marriage. Then he bade them put down Bad al-Din Hassan's turband on the settle, as he had deposited it with his own hand, and in like manner his bag trousers and the purse which were under the mattress, and told daughter to undress herself and go to bed in the private chamber as on her wedding night, adding, "When the son of thine uncle comes in to thee, say to him, Thou hast loitered while going to the privy, and call him to lie by thy side and keep him in converse till daybreak, when we will explain the whole matter to him." Then he bade take Bad al-Din Hassan out of the chest, after loosing the fetters from his feet and stripping off all that was on him save the fine shirt of blue silk in which he had slept on his wedding night, so that he was well nigh naked and trouserless. All this was done whilst he was sleeping on, utterly unconscious. Then, by doom of destiny, Bad al-Din Hassan turned over and awoke, and, finding himself in a lighted vestibule, said to himself, "Surely I am in the mazes of some dream." So he rose and went on a little to an inner door and looked in, and lo, he was in the very chamber wherein the bride had been displayed to him, and there he saw the bridal alcove and the settle and his turband and all his clothes. When he saw this he was confounded and kept advancing with one foot, and retiring with the other, saying, "Am I sleeping or waking?" And he began rubbing his forehead and saying, for indeed he was thoroughly astounded, "By Allah, verily this is the chamber of the bride who was displayed before me. Where am I then? I was surely but now in a box." Whilst he was talking with himself, Sit al-Huzn suddenly lifted the corner of the chamber curtain and said, "O my lord, wilt thou not come in? Indeed thou hast loitered long in the water closet." When he heard her words and saw her face he burst out laughing and said, "Of a truth this is a very nightmare among dreams." Then he went in sighing, and pondered what had come to pass with him and was perplexed about his case, and his affair became yet more obscure to him when he saw his turband and bag trousers, and when, feeling the pocket, he found the purse containing the 1,000 gold pieces. So he stood still and muttered, Allah is all-knowing. Assuredly I am dreaming a wild waking dream. Then said the Lady of Beauty to him, What ails thee to look puzzled and perplexed? Adding, Thou wast a very different man during the first of the night. He laughed and asked her, How long have I been away from thee? And she answered him, Allah preserve thee and his holy name be about thee. Thou didst but go out an hour ago for an occasion and return. Are thy wits clean gone? When Badr al-Din Hasan heard this, he laughed, and said, Thou hast spoken truth. But, when I went out from thee, I forgot myself a while in the draught house and dreamed that I was a cook at Damascus and abode there 10 years, and there came to me a boy who was of the sons of the great, and with him an eunuch. Here he passed his hand over his forehead and, feeling the scar, cried, By Allah, O my lady, it must have been true, for he struck my forehead with a stone and cut it open from eyebrow to eyebrow, and here is the mark, so it must have been on wake. Then he added, But perhaps I dreamt it when we fell asleep, I and thou, in each other's arms, for meseems it was as though I travelled to Damascus without tarbush and trousers and set up as a cook there. Then he was perplexed and considered for a while, and said, By Allah, I also fancied that I dressed a conserve of pomegranate grains and put too little pepper in it. By Allah, I must have slept in the numericent and have seen the whole of this in a dream. But how long was that dream? Allah upon thee, said Sitt al-Huzn, and what more sawest thou? So he related all to her, and presently said, By Allah, had I not woke up they would have nailed me to a cross of wood. Wherefore, asked she, and he answered, For putting too little pepper in the conserve of pomegranate grains, and meseemed they demolished my shop and dashed to pieces my pots and pans, destroyed all my stuff and put me in a box. They then sent for the carpenter to fashion a cross for me and would have crucified me thereon. Now alhamdulillah, thanks be to Allah, for that all this happened to me in sleep, and not on wake. Sitt al-Huzn laughed and clasped him to her bosom and he her to his. Then he thought again and said, By Allah, it could not be save while I was awake, truly I know not what to think of it. Then he lay him down and all the night he was bewildered about his case, now saying, I was dreaming, and then saying, I was awake till morning, when his uncle Shams al-Din, the Wazir, came to him and saluted him. When Badr al-Din Hasan saw him he said, By Allah, art thou not he who bade bind my hands behind me and smash my shop and nail me to a cross on a matter of conserved pomegranate grains because the dish lacked a sufficiency of pepper? Whereupon the Wazir said to him, No, O my son, that truth hath shown it soothfast and the concealed hath been revealed. Thou art the son of my brother, and I did all this with thee to certify myself that thou wast indeed he who went in unto my daughter that night. I could not be sure of this, till I saw that thou knewest the chamber and thy turband and thy trousers and thy gold and the papers in thy writing and in that of thy father, my brother, for I had never seen thee afore that and knew thee not. And as to thy mother I have prevailed upon her to come with me from Bassorah. So saying, he threw himself on his nephew's breast and wept for joy, and Badr al-Din Hasan, hearing these words from his uncle, marveled with exceeding marvel and fell on his neck and also shed tears for excess of delight. Then said the Wazir to him, O my son, the sole cause of all this is what passed between me and thy sire, and he told him the manner of his father wayfaring to Bassorah and all that had occurred to part them. Lastly the Wazir sent for a jib, and when his father saw him he cried, And this is he who struck me with the stone. Quoth the Wazir, This is thy son. And Badr al-Din Hasan threw himself upon his boy and began repeating, Long have I wept o'er severance ban and bane. Long from mine eyelids terils rail and rain, and vowed I if time reunion bring, my tongue from name of severance I'll restrain. Joyeth o'ercome me to this stress that I, from joy's revulsion to shed tears am fain. Ye are so trained to tears, O eyne of me. You weep with pleasure as you weep with pain. When he had ended his verse his mother came in and threw herself upon him and began reciting. When we met we complained. Our hearts were sore wrung, but plaint is not pleasant. Fro messenger's tongue. Then she wept and related to him what had befallen her since his departure, and he told her what he had suffered, and they thanked Allah Almighty for their reunion. 2 days after his arrival, the Wazir Shams al-Din went in to the Sultan and, kissing the ground between his hands, greeted him with the greeting due to kings. The Sultan rejoiced at his return, and his face brightened and, placing him hard by his side, asked him to relate all he had seen in his wayfaring and whatso had betided him in his going and coming. So the Wazir told him all that had passed from first to last, and the Sultan said, "Thanks be to Allah for thy victory and the winning of thy wish and thy safe return to thy children and thy people. And now I needs must see the son of thy brother, Hassan of Bassorah, so bring him to the audience hall tomorrow." Shams al-Din replied, "Thy slave shall stand in thy presence tomorrow, inshallah, if it be God's will." Then he saluted him and, returning to his own house, informed his nephew of the Sultan's desire to see him, whereto replied Hassan, "Whilome the Bassorite, the slave is obedient to the orders of his lord." And the result was that next day he accompanied his uncle, Shams al-Din, to the divan, and, after saluting the Sultan and doing him reverence in most ceremonious obeisance and with most courtly obsequiousness, he began improvising these verses. "The first in rank to kiss the ground shall deign. Before you, and all ends and aims attain, you are honor's fount, and all that hope of you shall gain more honor than hope hoped to gain." The Sultan smiled and signed to him to sit down. So he took a seat close to his uncle, Shams al-Din, and the king asked him his name. Quoth Bad al-Din, "Hassan, the meanest of thy slaves is known as Hassan the Bassorite, who is instant in prayer for thee day and night." The Sultan was pleased at his words and, being minded to test his learning and prove his good breeding, asked him, "Dost thou remember any verses in praise of the mole on the cheek?" He answered, "I do," and began reciting. "When I think of my love and our parting smart, my groans go forth and my tears upstart. Here's a mole that reminds me in color and charms. Oh, the black o' the eye and the grain of the heart." The king admired and praised the 2 couplets and said to him, "Quote something else. Allah bless thy sire and may thy tongue never tire." So he began. "That cheek mole's spot they evened with a grain of musk, nor did they hear the simile strain. Nay, marvel at the face comprising all beauty, nor falling short by single grain." The king shook with pleasure and said to him, "Say more, Allah bless thy days." So he began. "O you whose mole on cheek enthroned recalls a dot of musk upon a stone of ruby, grant me your favors, be not stone at heart, core of my heart whose only sustenance you be." Quoth the king, "Fair comparison, O Hassan, thou hast spoken excellently well and hast proved thyself accomplished in every accomplishment. Now explain to me how many meanings be there in the Arabic language for the word kal or mole." He replied, "Allah keep the king, 57, and some by tradition say 50. Said the Sultan, "Thou sayest sooth," presently adding, "Hast thou knowledge as to the points of excellence in beauty?" "Yes," answered Bad al-Din Hassan, "beauty consisteth in brightness of face, clearness of complexion, shapeliness of nose, gentleness of eyes, sweetness of mouth, cleverness of speech, slenderness of shape and seemliness of all attributes. But the acme of beauty is in the hair, and, indeed, Al-Shihab the Hijazi hath brought together all these items in his doggerel verse of the meter Rajaz, and it is this: Say thou to skin be soft, to face be fair, and gaze, nor shall they blame howso thou stare. Fine nose in beauty's list is high esteemed, nor less an eye full, bright and debonair. Eke did they well to laud the lovely lips, which e'en the sleep of me will never spare. A winning tongue, a stature tall and straight, a seemly union of gifts rarest rare, but beauty's acme in the hair one views it. So hear my strain and with some few excuse it." The Sultan was captivated by his converse and, regarding him as a friend, asked, "What meaning is there in the saw Shuray is foxier than the fox?" And he answered, "Know, O king, whom Almighty Allah keep, that the legist Shuray was wont, during the days of the plague, to make a visitation to Al-Najaf, and, whenever he stood up to pray, there came a fox which would plant himself facing him and which, by mimicking his movements, distracted him from his devotions. Now when this became longsome to him, one day he doffed his shirt and set it upon a cane and shook out the sleeves, then placing his turband on the top and girding its middle with a shawl, he stuck it up in the place where he used to pray. Presently up trotted the fox according to his custom and stood over against the figure, whereupon Shurayh came behind him, and took him. Hence the sayer saith, Shurayh foxier than the fox. When the Sultan heard Badr al-Din Hasan's explanation, he said to his uncle, Shams al-Din, truly this the son of thy brother is perfect in courtly breeding, and I do not think that his like can be found in Cairo. At this Hasan arose and kissed the ground before him and sat down again as a Mameluke should sit before his master. When the Sultan had thus assured himself of his courtly breeding and bearing and his knowledge of the liberal arts and belles lettres, he joyed with exceeding joy and invested him with a splendid robe of honor and promoted him to an office whereby he might better his condition. Then Badr al-Din Hasan arose and, kissing the ground before the king, wished him continuance of glory and asked leave to retire with his uncle, the Wazir Shams al-Din. The Sultan gave him leave and he issued forth, and the two returned home, where food was set before them and they ate what Allah had given them. After finishing his meal, Hasan repaired to the sitting chamber of his wife, the Lady of Beauty, and told her what had passed between him and the Sultan, whereupon quoth she, He cannot fail to make thee a cup companion and give thee largesse in excess and load thee with favours and bounties, so shalt thou, by Allah's blessing, dispread, like the greater light, the rays of thy perfection wherever thou be, on shore or on sea. Said he to her, I purpose to recite a qasida, an ode, in his praise, that he may redouble in affection for me. Thou art right in thine intent, she answered, so gather thy wits together and weigh thy words, and I shall surely see my husband favoured with his highest favour. Thereupon Hasan shut himself up and composed these couplets on a solid base and abounding in inner grace, and copies them out in a handwriting of the nicest taste. They are as follows. Mine is a chief who reached most haught estate. Treading the pathways of the good and great, his justice makes all regions safe and sure, and against froward foes bars every gate. Bold lion, hero, saint, e'en if you call seraph or sovereign, he with all may rate. The poorest suppliant rich from him returns. All words to praise him were inadequate. He to the day of peace is saffron morn, and murky night in furious warfare's bait. Bow 'neath his gifts our necks, and by his deeds, as king of freeborn souls he joys his state. Allah increase for us his term of years, and from his lot avert all risks and fears. When he had finished transcribing the lines, he dispatched them, in charge of one of his uncle's slaves, to the Sultan, who perused them, and his fancy was pleased, so he read them to those present, and all praised them with the highest praise. Thereupon he sent for the writer to his sitting chamber and said to him, Thou art from this day forth my boon companion, and I appoint to thee a monthly solde of 1,000 dirhams, over and above that I bestowed on thee aforetime. So Hasan rose and, kissing the ground before the king several times, prayed for the continuance of his greatness and glory and length of life and strength. Thus Badr al-Din Hasan the Barsorite waxed high in honor, and his fame flew forth to many regions, and he abode in all comfort and solace and delight of life with his uncle and his own folk till death overtook him. When the Caliph Harun al-Rashid heard this story from the mouth of his Wazir, Ja'far the Barmecide, he marveled much and said, It behoves that these stories be written in letters of liquid gold. Then he set the slave at liberty and assigned to the youth who had slain his wife such a monthly stipend as sufficed to make his life easy. He also gave him a concubine from amongst his own slave girls, and the young man became one of his cup companions. Yet this story, continued Shahrazad, is in no wise stranger than the tale of the tailor and the hunchback and the Jew and the Reeve and the Nazarene, and what betided them. Quoth the king, And what may that be? So Shahrazad began, in these words.